Hello everyone, welcome to Sleepy Crimes Hub. I'm here with you tonight to help you relax and slowly fall asleep. I know many of you are watching this video to rest your mind. So before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time is it right now. Now get comfortable, close your eyes. If you like, take a deep breath and let go of the day. Let's gently begin with case 1. JonBenet Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990. In Atlanta, Georgia, to Patricia Patsy Ramsey and John Bennett Ramsey, and she was the younger of their 2 children. Her family also included her older brother Burke Ramsey, born in 1987, along with 3 older half-siblings from her father's previous marriage. Her distinctive first name, JonBenet, was formed by blending her father's first and middle names, while her middle name, Patricia, was taken from her mother, reflecting a close family tradition. By the 1996 to 1997 school year, JonBenet was attending kindergarten at High Peaks Elementary School in Boulder, Colorado, where the family was living at the time. Tragedy struck shortly after Christmas when, on the morning of December 26, 1996, JonBenet's body was found in the basement of her family's home in Boulder, a discovery that would later become one of the most widely discussed and controversial cases in American true crime history. Just 5 days later, on December 31st, 1996, she was laid to rest at St. James Episcopal Cemetery in Marietta, Georgia, where she was buried beside her half-sister Elizabeth Pask Ramsey, who had lost her life in a car accident nearly 5 years earlier at the age of 22, making the burial a deeply emotional moment for the already grieving family. John Ramsey was a successful American businessman who served as the president of Access Graphics, a computer software distribution company that later became a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin, and before his life became publicly linked to tragedy, his career placed the family among Boulder's affluent community. His first marriage ended in divorce in 1978, after which he later married Patricia Patsy Ramsey, and in 1991, the couple relocated with their family to Boulder, Colorado, specifically because Access Graphics corporate headquarters were based there, marking a significant turning point in their personal and professional lives. Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen herself, became deeply involved in JonBenet's activities from an early age and entered her daughter into numerous child beauty pageants throughout the early to mid-1990s, where JonBenet went on to win several notable titles, including America's Royale Miss, Little Miss Charlevoix, Little Miss Colorado, Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl, and National Tiny Miss Beauty. Following JonBenet's murder in December 1996, her prominent participation in pageants and Patsy's intense dedication, often described by the media as pageant mother behavior, came under heavy public and media scrutiny, becoming a controversial aspect of the case and shaping public perception of the family in the years that followed. Approximately 6 months after JonBenet Ramsey's death, the Ramsey family left Boulder, Colorado, and relocated to a new home in Atlanta, Georgia, following summer spent at their vacation retreat in Charlevoix, Michigan, a move that marked their attempt to distance themselves from the intense scrutiny surrounding the case. Years later, further tragedy struck the family when Patsy Ramsey died in 2006 at the age of 49 after a battle with ovarian cancer, and she was laid to rest beside her daughter, bringing their story together once more in death. On the night JonBenet died, the only individuals known to have been inside the Ramsey home were John Ramsey, Patsy Ramsey, and their son Burke, making them the last confirmed people to see her alive. Despite a ransom note being discovered that clearly instructed the family not to contact police or friends, Patsy Ramsey called emergency services at approximately 5:52 a.m. Mountain Standard Time on December 26, 1996, reporting her daughter missing, and shortly afterward, she also contacted several family members and friends. Within 3 minutes of the 911 call, 2 police officers arrived at the residence and began an initial investigation, conducting a brief and limited search of the house. However, during this early sweep, they found no signs of forced entry, a detail that would later become one of the many puzzling and controversial aspects of the investigation that on the morning of December 26, 1996, Officer Rick French proceeded to the basement of the Ramsey home and came upon a door that was secured by an additional wooden latch at the top of the door frame. He paused in front of it, carefully observing, but ultimately walked away without opening it, later explaining that he was searching for a possible exit route that a kidnapper might have used. Since the wooden latch was fastened from the inside, it would have been impossible for an intruder to leave through that door and then secure the latch behind them, effectively ruling it out as an escape route. Tragically, JonBenét's body was later discovered hidden behind this very door, revealing that the initial assumption of a straightforward kidnapping was far from the reality. As the search unfolded, with JonBenet still missing, John Ramsey made arrangements to pay the ransom, acting under the belief that his daughter had been abducted. A forensics team was dispatched, focusing primarily on JonBenét's bedroom, which was cordoned off to prevent contamination, while the rest of the house remained largely unprotected, allowing friends, family, victim advocates, and even the family's minister to move freely around the home, cleaning surfaces in the kitchen and possibly disturbing critical evidence. Around 8 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, Boulder Detective Linda Arnn arrived, anticipating instructions from the alleged kidnapper, but despite these precautions, no one ever came to claim the ransom, and the case began to take on the baffling and tragic complexities that would haunt the investigation for decades. At approximately 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time on December 26, 1996, Detective Linda Arnn instructed John Ramsey and family friend Fleet White to conduct a careful search of the Ramsey home to determine if anything seemed amiss, leading them to begin in the basement where Officer French had earlier paused. It was John Ramsey who opened the latch door that French had overlooked, revealing the tragic and shocking scene of his daughter JonBenét's body lying in one of the rooms. Her mouth was sealed with duct tape. A nylon cord was wrapped around her wrists and neck, and her torso was partially covered by a white blanket, creating a grim tableau of the crime. In a panicked response, John lifted his daughter's body and carried her upstairs, unintentionally contaminating the crime scene and disturbing critical forensic evidence that the returning investigators would have relied upon, complicating the investigation from its earliest stages. Following this horrifying discovery, each member of the Ramsey family provided handwriting samples, blood, and hair to the police as part of standard forensic procedures. John and Patsy Ramsey participated in a preliminary interview lasting over 2 hours, recounting details of the morning, while Burke Ramsey was also interviewed within the first couple of weeks after his sister's death, marking the beginning of an exhaustive and highly scrutinized investigation into one of the most notorious and perplexing cases in American criminal history. Several eyewitness accounts added to the mysterious and unsettling timeline of events on the night of December 25th to 26th, 1996. Scott Gibbons, a neighbor, reported that around midnight, while observing from his kitchen window, he saw the upper kitchen of the Ramsey residence illuminated with dimmed lights, suggesting activity in the house during the late hours. Around the same time, another neighbor, Melody Stanton, stated that she awoke shortly after midnight to the sound of a child's scream coming from the Ramsey home, an account that added to the tension and urgency surrounding JonBenét's disappearance. These reports, coupled with the later discovery of the ransom note, contributed to the perplexing and heavily scrutinized circumstances of the case, shaping both the early investigation and the enduring public fascination with the events that unfolded that night. Patsy Ramsey reported that she discovered a 2.5-page handwritten ransom note placed conspicuously on the kitchen staircase of their home, which demanded $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return. Notably, John Ramsey observed that this sum was almost identical to his Christmas bonus from the previous year, immediately raising questions about whether someone with intimate knowledge of the family's finances could have authored the note. Investigators explored several theories regarding the significance of the demanded amount, including the possibility that employees at Access Graphics, John's company, might have known the exact figure of his bonus. Another line of inquiry considered a religious connection, as the number 118 could reference Psalm 118, prompting authorities to consult religious sources for potential relevance. Beyond the monetary and symbolic implications, Investigators also noted that the ransom note's language and phrasing bore similarities to dialogue from popular films, including Ruthless People, Ransom, Escape from New York, Speed, and Dirty Harry, suggesting the possibility that the author had been influenced by cinematic depictions of crime, which added another layer of complexity and intrigue to an already puzzling and high-profile investigation. The ransom note found at the Ramsey home was unusually long, prompting the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, to inform local authorities that it was extremely rare for such a detailed note to be written at the crime scene. Police quickly grew suspicious that the note might have been staged, as it contained no fingerprints other than those of Patsy Ramsey and the officials who had handled it, and it featured unusual stylistic elements, such as excessive exclamation marks and peculiar initialisms. Forensic analysis revealed that both the ransom note and a practice draft were composed using a pen and notepad from the Ramsey home, leading investigators to consider that the author had easy access to household materials. A Colorado Bureau of Investigation, CBI, report noted indications that the author of the ransom note is Patricia Ramsey, but the evidence was not conclusive. Prominent forensic pathologist Michael Baden, who consulted with both the prosecution and defense, stated that in his 60 years of experience, he had never encountered a note like it and expressed skepticism that it had been written by an outside stranger. Despite these controversies, a federal court later ruled it highly unlikely that Patsy Ramsey authored the note, relying on assessments from 6 certified handwriting experts, and criticized uncredentialed individuals who publicly accused her without scientific evidence, highlighting the contentious and often speculative nature of interpretations surrounding the note in the aftermath of JonBenét's tragic death. The ransom note discovered in the Ramsey home was addressed directly to John Ramsey and written in an aggressive, threatening tone, claiming that JonBenet had been taken by a so-called small foreign faction that expressed hostility toward the country John's business served, while oddly stating respect for him personally. The author insisted that JonBenet was alive and unharmed, and warned that her life depended entirely on John's strict obedience to their instructions, demanding a ransom amount that matched his previous year's Christmas bonus, and giving precise directions about how the money should be withdrawn, packaged, and prepared for delivery. The note stated that the kidnappers would call John the following morning, between early and late morning hours, to provide further instructions, emphasizing that the delivery would be physically exhausting and advising him to remain well-rested. Throughout the message, the writer repeatedly threatened JonBenét's immediate death if John contacted police, federal authorities, bank officials, or anyone at all, even using exaggerated and violent language to reinforce compliance, while also claiming to monitor the family constantly and warning against any attempt at deception, electronic tracking, or clever tactics. The note contained mocking and taunting remarks aimed personally at John, attempting to intimidate and belittle him, and ended with a dramatic sign-off using the initials SBTC followed by the word victory, making the message unusually theatrical, excessively long, and emotionally manipulative compared to typical ransom notes, and ultimately becoming one of the most disturbing and controversial pieces of evidence in the JonBenet Ramsey case. The autopsy of JonBenet Ramsey revealed a horrifying combination of injuries, confirming that her death was a homicide. The medical examiner determined that she had been strangled and suffered a skull fracture, with the official cause of death recorded as asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. While there was no evidence of conventional rape, sexual assault could not be entirely ruled out. Although no semen was detected, the examination revealed a vaginal injury, and evidence suggested that the paintbrush used in the garrote may also have been involved in the assault. The pathologist noted that at the time of the autopsy, JonBenét's vaginal area appeared to have been wiped with a cloth, further complicating the forensic picture. These findings painted a disturbing and violent scenario, underscoring the brutality of the crime and the challenges investigators faced in piecing together the exact sequence of events that led to the tragic death of a 6-year-old girl. The investigation into JonBenet Ramsey's death revealed that a garrote, fashioned from a length of nylon cord and the broken handle of a paintbrush, had been tied around her neck and was apparently the instrument used to strangle her. Part of the bristle end of the paintbrush was later recovered from a tub containing Patsy Ramsey's art supplies. Yet the bottom third of the brush handle was never found despite a thorough and extensive search of the home by police in the days following the discovery of her body, leaving a crucial piece of physical evidence missing. The autopsy also noted the presence of vegetable or fruit material, which may represent pineapple, indicating that JonBenet had eaten some just a few hours before her death. Photographs taken on the day her body was found showed a bowl of pineapple on the kitchen table with a spoon. Yet both John and Patsy Ramsey stated that they did not recall placing the bowl there or feeding pineapple to JonBenet. Investigators further reported that Patsy's fingerprints were found on the bowl, adding another layer of complexity to the case and raising questions about the timeline of events and the handling of evidence in the hours leading up to her death. In December 2003, forensic investigators were able to extract enough material from a mixed blood sample found on JonBenet's underwear to establish a DNA profile, which ultimately belonged to an unknown male and excluded all members of the Ramsey family. Later, in October 2016, more advanced and sensitive testing was carried out. This new analysis revealed something even more unsettling. The original sample contained genetic markers from 2 additional individuals, besides JonBenet herself. This suggested that more than one unknown person may have been involved. A. James Kohler, a lead investigator for the district attorney's office, revealed that male DNA traces were also found on the cord and the paintbrush used in the crime. He pointed out that these details were never publicly shared by Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey. In total, investigators detected 6 separate DNA samples, all belonging to unknown individuals. Former FBI profiler Candace DeLong stated that because the same DNA appeared in multiple locations and on different surfaces, it strongly suggested that the DNA belonged to the killer. Supporting this view, former Adams County District Attorney Bob Grant emphasized that any true resolution of the case must explain why this DNA was present on several pieces of JonBenet's clothing. However, not everyone agrees. Forensic pathologist Michael Baden warned that tiny amounts of DNA can be transferred innocently through everyday contact. He argued that there is still no definitive forensic proof that a stranger was involved, keeping the debate alive and unresolved. From the earliest days of the case, the investigation into JonBenet Ramsey's murder was marked by controversy, missteps, and intense public scrutiny, with experts, media commentators, and even the Ramsey family themselves identifying various potential suspects over the years. Initially, Boulder police focused almost exclusively on John and Patsy Ramsey, treating them as the primary subjects of interest. But as the case progressed and leads expanded, the scope widened dramatically. By October 1997, authorities had compiled an index of more than 1,600 individuals considered persons of interest. Numerous errors in the initial investigation significantly complicated efforts to resolve the case and evaluate competing theories, including the loss and contamination of critical evidence, a lack of experienced and technically trained investigators, the sharing of evidence with the Ramsey family, and delays in conducting formal interviews with JonBenet's parents. Adding further complexity, misleading information was intentionally leaked by Boulder police in an effort to generate public pressure on John and Patsy to cooperate more fully with interview requests, a strategy that ultimately backfired by fueling relentless media coverage, shaping public opinion, and permanently placing the Ramsey family at the center of one of the most intensely debated and polarizing criminal investigations in modern American history. In early 1997, veteran homicide detective Lou Smith came out of retirement to assist the Boulder County District Attorney's Office with the JonBenet Ramsey case, bringing decades of investigative experience to an inquiry already mired in controversy. After more than a year of review, in May 1998, Smith formally presented his findings to the Boulder Police Department, alongside other members of the DA's staff, concluding that the available evidence pointed away from the Ramsey family and instead supported the possibility of an intruder. Despite this, police investigators remained firmly committed to their belief that John and Patsy Ramsey were responsible, and Smith and the DA's office were unable to dislodge that position. As tensions escalated and the DA's office attempted to assume greater control over the investigation, the deepening conflict between prosecutors and police, combined with mounting public pressure to secure a conviction, prompted Colorado Governor Roy Romer to intervene. He appointed Michael Cain as a special prosecutor, tasking him with convening a grand jury to independently examine the evidence. The division within the investigation was further underscored by the resignation of two lead investigators, each holding sharply opposing views. Lou Smith resigned because he believed the investigation had incompetently ignored the intruder theory, while Steve Thomas stepped down after concluding that the district attorney's office had interfered with the case and failed to adequately support his theory that the crime occurred within the household, highlighting the profound and unresolved fractures that plagued the investigation from within. A grand jury was convened on September 15, 1998, to determine whether John and Patsy Ramsey should be indicted on charges connected to their daughter's death. And in 1999, the jury returned a true bill, finding probable cause to accuse the Ramseys of placing JonBenét in a situation of danger that ultimately led to her death. Despite this finding, Boulder County District Attorney Alex Hunter chose not to pursue prosecution, explaining that while the grand jury standard requires only probable cause, he did not believe the evidence was strong enough to meet the much higher legal threshold of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, which is necessary to secure a criminal conviction. Control of the case later shifted when Mary Lacy became Boulder County District Attorney and formally took over the investigation from the police on December 26, 2002. In April 2003, she publicly aligned with the findings of a federal judge involved in a 2002 libel case, stating that the evidence presented was more consistent with the theory that an intruder murdered JonBenét than with the idea that Patsy Ramsey was responsible. Years later, on July 9, 2008, the Boulder District Attorney's Office announced that advances in DNA sampling and testing, specifically touch DNA analysis, had resulted in all members of the Ramsey family being excluded as suspects, and Mary Lacy formally and publicly exonerated the Ramseys. A decision that remains one of the most debated moments in the long and unresolved history of the case. On February 2, 2009, Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner announced that Stan Garnett, the newly appointed Boulder County District Attorney, had formally returned control of the JonBenét Ramsey case to the Boulder Police Department, allowing his agency to resume direct investigation into the long unsolved homicide. After reviewing the matter, Garnett determined that the statute of limitations for the specific charges identified in the 1999 grand jury true bill had already expired, and as a result, he did not pursue any renewed legal action against the Ramsey family. Several years later, in October 2010, Boulder Police officially reopened the cold case, launching a renewed investigative effort that included new interviews and a fresh review by a committee made up of state and federal investigators, with expectations that advanced DNA technology would provide new leads or clarity. Despite these efforts, authorities later confirmed that the interviews did not produce any new or actionable information, leaving the case unresolved. Still, the investigation was never formally closed, and in September 2016, Boulder Police Chief Greg Testa publicly stated that the death of JonBenét Ramsey remains an active homicide investigation, underscoring that, decades later, the case continues to stand as one of the most enduring and haunting mysteries in American criminal history. In 2015, former Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner publicly disagreed with the decision to exonerate the Ramsey family, arguing that clearing anyone based on a small and unproven piece of evidence was unreasonable, especially when its direct connection to the crime had not been definitively established. He emphasized that the unknown male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing should remain the central focus of the investigation and stated that, unless proven otherwise, the individual who donated that DNA should still be considered a suspect. The following year, in 2016, Gordon Coombs, a former investigator for the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, also expressed skepticism about completely absolving the Ramseys, explaining that people constantly shed DNA through skin cells, which can be transferred innocently and unpredictably, and that relying solely on touch DNA to clear suspects was especially problematic given that the crime scene was not properly secured in the early hours of the investigation. Adding to the internal criticism, Stephen E. Pitt, a forensic psychiatrist hired by Boulder authorities, stated that Mary Lacey's public exoneration of the Ramseys was deeply offensive to Chief Beckner and the core group of detectives who had spent years working the case, highlighting the deep divisions among law enforcement professionals and reinforcing how unresolved disagreements over DNA evidence and investigative errors have continued to fuel debate and controversy in the JonBenét Ramsey case decades after her death. Over the years, investigators and commentators have generally framed the death of JonBenét Ramsey around two primary theories. The family member theory, which suggests that one or more members of her own household were responsible, and the intruder theory, which proposes that an unknown outsider entered the home and committed the crime. In the early stages of the investigation, Boulder police focused almost entirely on JonBenét's parents, operating from a perspective shared by some law enforcement professionals that, in cases involving the homicide of a child, the likelihood of a family member or caregiver being involved is statistically far higher than that of a stranger. Investigators pointed to the absence of clear signs of forced entry into the home and to what they interpreted as evidence of staging, particularly the lengthy and unusual ransom note, as factors supporting suspicion within a household. Police also expressed frustration with what they perceived as a lack of cooperation from the Ramseys during the investigation, a stance that further deepened suspicion and tension between the family and authorities. The Ramseys, however, consistently maintained that their hesitation stemmed from fear that investigators were prematurely narrowing the focus onto them and failing to fully pursue the possibility of an intruder, believing that once they were labeled primary suspects, alternative leads would not receive serious attention. This clash of perspectives helped entrench the family member theory in the public narrative, while simultaneously fueling ongoing debate and mistrust that would continue to divide investigators, experts, and the public for decades. Former FBI special agent and criminal profiler John Edward Douglas publicly argued that John and Patsy Ramsey were not responsible for their daughter's death, strongly criticizing the way the case was shaped by media coverage and public opinion rather than courtroom standards, stating that he had never encountered another case in which so many people reached firm conclusions based largely on statistics, tabloid reporting, and escalating sensationalism within mainstream media, which he believed distorted both facts and fair judgment long before any legal resolution could occur. Despite Douglas's stance, one long-discussed theory within the family member framework suggests that Patsy Ramsey may have struck JonBenét during a moment of rage, allegedly following a bedwetting incident on the night of December 25, 1996, and then, mistakenly believing the child was already dead, attempted to stage the scene by strangling her, a theory that has remained controversial and deeply disputed. This claim has been consistently rejected by the Ramsey family, with JonBenét's brother Burke Ramsey later stating that physical punishment was not part of their upbringing and emphasizing that violence of any kind was unthinkable within their household. Some investigators and commentators have also suggested that the strangulation itself may have been a red herring, deliberately introduced to obscure the true sequence or cause of the fatal injuries and complicate interpretation of the crime. Together, these conflicting views illustrate how sharply divided expert opinions remain, reinforcing why the JonBenét Ramsey case. Continue Burke Ramsey, who was 9 years old at the time of JonBenét's death, was interviewed by investigators at least 3 times, and those interviews raised no concerns, with a separate review by a child psychologist concluding that the Ramsey family appeared to have healthy and caring relationships. In 1998, Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner stated publicly that Burke was not involved in his sister's killing, and this position was reaffirmed in May 1999 when the Boulder County District Attorney's Office again confirmed that Burke was not a suspect, noting that investigators had never considered him one. In an effort to encourage new leads, the Ramseys offered a $100,000 reward in a newspaper advertisement dated April 27, 1997, and 3 days later, more than 4 months after JonBenét's body was discovered, They agreed for the first time to separate formal interviews at the Boulder County Justice Center. Public pressure continued to intensify, and in 1999, Colorado Governor Bill Owens criticized the couple, telling them to stop hiding behind attorneys and a public relations firm. That same year, a Colorado grand jury voted to indict the parents, citing 2 counts each of child abuse and alleging that they had unlawfully, knowingly, recklessly, and feloniously placed their child in a situation that posed a threat to her life or health, which resulted in JonBenét's death. During the grand jury proceedings, testimony was heard from experts including DNA specialist Barry Scheck and forensic expert Henry Lee. But on October 13, 1999, District Attorney Alex Hunter declined to sign the indictment, stating that the evidence was insufficient to support prosecution, leading the public to believe the grand jury process had been inconclusive. In 2002, the statute of limitations expired on the grand jury's charges, and the fact that the grand jury had actually voted to indict the parents was not made public until October 25, 2013, when previously sealed court documents were released. The CBS program, The Case of JonBenét Ramsey, which aired on September 18th and 19th, 2016, assembled a panel of experts to examine the evidence surrounding JonBenét's death. The experts proposed a controversial theory that Burke Ramsey may have struck his sister on the head with a heavy object, possibly a flashlight, after she allegedly took a piece of pineapple from his bowl, and that he may not have intended to kill her. They further suggested that the ransom note could have been written to conceal the circumstances of her death. In response, Burke Ramsey's attorneys filed defamation lawsuits against CBS, the show's producers, and several participants, challenging many of the claims presented. Separately, the intruder theory has long remained a key line of investigation, pursued by both police and prosecutors in part because of an unidentified boot mark found in the basement room where JonBenét's body was discovered. Early persons of interest included neighbor Bill McReynolds, local reporter Chris Wolf, whose then girlfriend reported him as a suspect, the family housekeeper Linda Hoffman Pugh, and Michael Helgoth, a man who died by apparent suicide shortly after the murder. Investigators conducted hundreds of DNA tests in attempts to match the DNA recovered during the autopsy. In a 2003 defamation lawsuit, Wolf versus Ramsey, Judge Julie E. Carnes noted that there was virtually no evidence supporting the theory that the Ramseys killed their daughter, while there was abundant evidence supporting the belief that an intruder entered the home on the night of December 25th, 1996, and murdered JonBenet, underscoring that the intruder theory continues to be a significant and credible explanation in the case. Detective Lou Smith, who worked on the JonBenet Ramsey case, carefully reviewed the available evidence and concluded that an intruder, rather than a family member, had committed the crime. On the night of her death, there were 2 windows left slightly open to allow Christmas light cords to pass through, a broken basement window, and 1 unlocked door, which Smith theorized could have provided access for an outsider to enter the home. According to his theory, the intruder entered through the broken basement window, subdued JonBenet with a stun gun, took her to the basement, killed her, and left the ransom note behind. Critics of this theory have pointed to evidence that seems to contradict it, including intact cobwebs in the basement window and steel grate, undisturbed foliage around the window, as well as cobwebs and dust on window tracks and sills, which they argue make an undetected entry unlikely. Despite these criticisms, Smith's theory was supported by former FBI agent John E. Douglas, who had been retained by the Ramsey family and believed strongly in their innocence. Convinced that the Ramseys had not committed the crime, Smith resigned from the official investigation on September 20th, 1998, just 5 days after the grand jury was convened against the Ramseys. But he continued to research and work on the case independently until his death in 2010, remaining one of the most prominent advocates of the intruder hypothesis. Author Steven Singular, in his book Presumed Guilty, 1999, revised 2016, consulted with cybercrime specialists and argued that JonBenet Ramsey may have attracted the attention of child pornographers and pedophiles connected to the child pageant circuit. Singular contends that the investigation's heavy focus on the Ramsey parents hindered exploration of alternate scenarios, and he maintains that the Ramseys were not responsible for JonBenet's murder. though they may have unwittingly exposed her to sexual predators. He speculates that this context helps explain why the grand jury did not indict the Ramseys for murder, but instead issued charges related to child abuse or endangerment, suggesting that their actions placed JonBenet in a potentially risky situation. Supporting the plausibility of an intruder, it was noted that there had been over 100 burglaries in the Ramseys neighborhood in the months prior to JonBenet's death, and 38 registered sex offenders lived within a 2-mile radius of their home. In 2001, former Boulder County Prosecutor Tripp DeMuth and Boulder County Sheriff's Detective Steve Ainsworth publicly stated that the intruder theory warranted a more aggressive investigation. One person identified as a potential suspect by Lou Smith was Gary Howard Oliva, a registered sex offender who was later arrested in June 2016 on charges, including 2 counts of attempted sexual exploitation of a child and 1 count of sexual exploitation of a child, and who had previously been publicly identified as a suspect during an October 2002 episode of 48 Hours Investigates. In the A&E program The Killing of JonBenet, The Truth Uncovered, which aired on September 5, 2016, DNA and forensic expert Lawrence Kobylinski stated that based on his analysis of the evidence, the crime was committed by an unidentified male, supporting the intruder theory. The district attorney's office investigating pedophiles also followed the intruder hypothesis, as indicated to former Denver prosecutor Craig Silverman, who noted that once the possibility of an intruder is acknowledged, it becomes highly unlikely that any member of the Ramsey family could be successfully prosecuted. During this period, the Ramseys developed a working relationship with District Attorney Mary Lacey in her office, a connection that drew criticism from city authorities, including Mayor Leslie L. Durgeon. Former investigator Gordon Coombs, who joined Lacey's office while JonBenet's clothing was being tested for touch DNA, confirmed that Lacey strongly supported the intruder theory and regularly discussed it with her staff. Coombs also reported that, although he was not directly assigned to the case, he was warned against voicing opposition to this theory, as doing so might jeopardize his position, describing the situation as weird and an unusual attempt to influence the entire agency's approach to the investigation. That on August 15, 2006, John Mark Carr, a 41-year-old school teacher, was arrested in Bangkok, Thailand after falsely confessing to the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. Carr claimed that he had drugged, sexually assaulted, and accidentally killed JonBenet, but authorities quickly found that his confession lacked credibility. CNN reported that investigators found no evidence linking Carr to the crime scene. His confession included only basic facts that were already publicly known and failed to provide any additional verifiable details about the crime. Carr's claim that JonBenet had been drugged was inconsistent with the autopsy, which revealed no drugs in her system. Moreover, DNA testing confirmed that Carr's DNA did not match the DNA recovered from JonBenet's body, further proving that his confession was false. Beginning in 1999, Lynn Wood, the Ramsey family's libel attorney, initiated a series of defamation lawsuits against individuals and media companies that had reported on the JonBenet Ramsey case. That year, the family sued Star Magazine and its parent company, American Media Incorporated, on behalf of their son, Burke. Over the years, the Ramseys and their friends filed additional defamation suits against various unnamed media outlets. In 2001, a defamation suit was brought against the authors and publisher of JonBenet. Inside the Ramsey murder investigation, 2000, the case against Don Davis, Stephen Thomas, and St. Martin's Press was settled out of court the following year. The Ramseys themselves faced 2 defamation lawsuits arising from the publication of their book The Death of Innocence, 2001, filed by individuals who had been named in the book as persons investigated by Boulder police in connection with the case. They were defended by Linwood along with Atlanta attorneys James C. Rawls, Eric P. Schroeder, and S. Derek Bauer, and successfully obtained dismissal of both lawsuits. U.S. District Court Judge Julie Carnes later noted that there was abundant evidence suggesting that an intruder committed the murder. In November 2006, another defamation suit was filed by Rod Westmoreland, a friend of John Ramsey, against an anonymous internet user using the pseudonym Under Theradar, who had posted messages online falsely implicating Westmoreland in JonBenet's murder. In September 2016, during an interview with CBS Detroit in the documentary series The Case of JonBenet Ramsey, forensic pathologist Werner Spitz publicly accused Burke Ramsey of killing his sister. In response, on October 6, 2016, Burke filed a defamation lawsuit against Spitz, seeking $150 million in punitive and compensatory damages, with Lynn Wood among his attorneys. Wood also announced plans to file a separate suit against CBS later that month. On December 28, 2016, Burke's legal team expanded the litigation by filing an additional civil lawsuit against CBS. The production company Critical Content LLC and 7 experts and consultants, claiming defamation and seeking $250 million in compensatory damages and $500 million in punitive damages. In January 2018, a judge denied CBS's motion to dismiss, allowing the lawsuit to proceed, and by January 2019, Wood announced that the case had been settled to the satisfaction of all parties. JonBenet Ramsey has also been portrayed in multiple dramatizations over the years, including Diane Yandeli in the miniseries Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, 2000, Julia Grandstrom in the TV movie Getting Away with Murder, The JonBenet Ramsey Story, 2000, Peyton Lipinski in Lifetime's Who Killed JonBenet, 2016, and Emily Mitchell in the Paramount Plus miniseries Unspeakable, The Murder of JonBenet Ramsey, 2026. Case 2, Let Me Explain. Madeline Beth McCann was born in Leicester and grew up with her family in the quiet village of Rothley, Leicestershire, surrounded by the warmth and routines of family life. Shortly after her disappearance, her parents took the difficult step of requesting that she be made a ward of court in England, a measure that granted the court formal powers to act in her best interest and oversee aspects of her welfare during the ongoing investigation. Police described Madeline as a blonde-haired child with striking blue-green eyes, marked by a small brown spot on her left calf and a distinctive dark strip across the iris of her right eye, details that became central to appeals for information. In the years following, the McCanns, desperate to keep hope alive, released age-progressed images showing how Madeline might have looked, while the Metropolitan Police later commissioned another to assist the investigation, reflecting the ongoing international concern for her safety. Her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, are both physicians and devoted practicing Roman Catholics, whose professional lives were marked by dedication and care for others even as they faced unimaginable personal hardship. Kate Marie McCann, née Healy, born in Huyton near Liverpool, pursued her education with distinction, attending All Saints School in Anfield before moving on to Notre Dame High School in Everton Valley, ultimately graduating with a degree in medicine from the University of Dundee. Her career journey took her briefly into obstetrics and gynecology, followed by anesthetics, and later into general practice, demonstrating a commitment to the well-being of her patients alongside the tireless efforts she made for her own family during one of their most challenging times. Gerald Patrick McCann, born in Glasgow, attended Holyrood RC Secondary School before continuing his studies at the University of Glasgow, where he earned a degree in physiology and sports science, later qualifying in medicine and ultimately obtaining his MD from the same university. Since 2005, he has worked as a consultant cardiologist at Glenfield Hospital in Leicester. Gerald and Kate McCann first met in Glasgow and were married several years later, building a family together that would include Madeline and later a pair of twins. During a holiday that would become central to global attention, the McCanns were accompanied by a close group of friends and children, sharing their days and evenings together in a resort's tapas restaurant, a routine that led the media to dub the group the Tapas 7. On one of those evenings, a sighting by a friend in the group, Jane Tanner, who reported seeing a man carrying a child away from the resort shortly before Madeline was reported missing, became one of the most discussed and scrutinized elements of the case, symbolizing the start of a worldwide search and an investigation that would capture international attention. The McCanns arrived in Praia da Luz, a small village in Portugal's Algarve region, often nicknamed Little Britain due to the large number of British homeowners and holidaymakers, on the 28th of April for a week-long spring break. They had booked their stay through the British holiday company Mark Warner Ltd. and were assigned an apartment on Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva, owned by a retired teacher from Liverpool, one of several privately owned properties that the company rented to visitors. The village, with its quiet streets and close-knit community, offered the family a picturesque setting for their holiday, though it would soon become the backdrop for events that would attract worldwide attention and spark one of the most high-profile investigations in recent history. The McCanns stayed in a two-bedroom ground-floor apartment in a block of apartments known as Waterside Village, located on the edge of part of Mark Warner's Ocean Club Resort. Their neighbors included Matthew and Rachel Oldfield next door, Jane Tanner and Russell O'Brien nearby, and the Paynes and Diane Webster on the first floor. The apartment, situated on the corner of two streets, was accessible to the public from multiple sides, with sliding glass patio doors in the living room at the back providing a view of the resort's pool, tennis courts, Tapas restaurant, and bar. These doors could be reached via a small gate and set of steps from the street, while the front door opened onto the opposite side of the block, facing another street. The McCanns children slept in a bedroom adjacent to the front door, which the parents kept locked at all times. The bedroom had a single waist-high window with curtains and a metal exterior shutter, both kept closed throughout the holiday, overlooking a narrow walkway and a small car park separated from the street by a low wall. Madeline slept in a single bed positioned next to the bedroom door, on the side opposite the window, while the twins slept in travel cots in the middle of the room, with another single bed positioned beneath the window, completing the careful arrangement of the children's sleeping spaces that on the penultimate day of the McCanns' holiday, Madeline began the morning with a question to her parents over breakfast, asking why they had not come when she and her brother had cried the night before, a moment that would later weigh heavily on her parents as they wondered if someone had entered the children's bedroom. That morning, the children spent time in the resort's kids' club, after which the family returned to their apartment for lunch before heading to the pool, where Kate captured the last known photograph of Madeline, sitting contentedly beside her father and her younger sister. Later, the children returned to the kids' club, and their mother took them back to the apartment while their father attended a tennis lesson. That evening, the McCanns put the children to bed around 7, with Madeline tucked in a short-sleeved, pink and white pajamas adorned with Eeyore, her comfort blanket and a soft toy, Cuddle Cat, placed close by, completing a scene of ordinary family care that would soon be overshadowed by the events that followed. That evening, the McCanns left their apartment to join their friends for dinner at the Ocean Club's open-air tapas restaurant, located on the far side of the pool from their ground floor apartment. While the top of their apartment was visible from the restaurant, the doors themselves were not, and the patio doors could only be locked from the inside, so they were left closed but unlocked with the curtains drawn, allowing the parents to check on the children when needed. A small child safety gate at the top of the steps and a low gate at the bottom provided additional, though limited, security. The resort staff had placed a note in a message book at the pool reception, requesting that the same table overlooking the apartments be reserved for the McCanns and their friends each evening, with the information that the children were asleep in the apartments. Kate later considered that anyone observing the note could have known where the children were. Throughout the evening, the McCanns and their friends left the restaurant periodically to check on the children. During one such check, Jerry returned to the apartment to find the children asleep, though he noticed that the bedroom door, which he remembered leaving slightly ajar, now stood almost wide open. He carefully adjusted it before returning to the restaurant, unaware that these moments would be among the last hours before the events that would draw international attention. That night, one of the Tapas 7, Jane Tanner, reported seeing a man carrying a young child, a sighting that quickly became a key element in the early stages of the investigation. Tanner had left the restaurant shortly after dinner to check on her own daughter and, while walking back, passed Jerry McCann on the street, who had just returned from checking on his children. Though he stopped to chat with another holidaymaker, neither recalled seeing Tanner, which puzzled the Portuguese police given the narrowness of the street and led them to question the credibility of her report. Tanner told authorities that she had seen a man walking just ahead of her at a junction near the McCann's apartment, carrying a child in his arms and moving away from the front of the apartment. In the early investigation, the direction in which he was walking was considered significant, as he appeared to be moving toward the home of a nearby British Portuguese resident who became the first suspect in the case. The child in his arms was dressed in light-colored pajamas with a floral pattern and leg cuffs, similar to what Madeline had been wearing, and Tanner described the man as a white, dark-haired adult of Mediterranean or Southern European appearance, with a slender build, wearing neutral-colored trousers and a dark jacket, and not appearing to be a tourist. Kate McCann later confirmed that Tanner shared her account with Portuguese police as soon as Madeline was reported missing, though the description was not released to the media for several weeks. Later, Madeline's fund commissioned a forensic artist to produce an image of the man, which was publicly released months afterward, keeping the sighting in the spotlight as the investigation unfolded. The sighting by Jane Tanner initially seemed important because it appeared to provide a time frame for Madeline's abduction, but Scotland Yard later regarded it as a red herring. Years afterward, they identified a British holidaymaker as the man Tanner had seen. He had been returning to his apartment after collecting his daughter from the Ocean Club night crash. Photographs taken by Scotland Yard showed him wearing the same or similar clothes and in a pose matching Tanner's report, while the pajamas his daughter wore also matched the description. Operation Grange's lead detective stated they were almost certain the sighting was unrelated to the abduction, allowing investigators to focus on another report later that evening. This second sighting, reported by Martin and Mary Smith, who were on holiday from Ireland, provided what Scotland Yard concluded to be the approximate time of Madeline's kidnapping. The Smiths saw a man walking away from the Ocean Club toward the street leading to the beach, carrying a young girl around 3 or 4 years old, with blonde hair and pale skin, dressed in light-colored pajamas and barefoot. They described the man as being in his mid-30s, with a slim to average build, short brown hair, wearing cream or beige trousers, and not appearing to be a tourist, noting that he seemed uncomfortable carrying the child. Based on their testimony, EFITs were later created by Oakley International, private investigators hired by the McCanns, and these images were publicly released years later by Scotland Yard on the BBC program Crime Watch, providing crucial insight into the timeline of the abduction. Kate had planned to check on the children around half an hour earlier, but one of the top is 7, Matthew Oldfield, offered to do it while attending to his own children in the apartment next door. He noticed that the McCann's children's bedroom door was wide open, but hearing no noise, he left without looking closely enough to see whether Madeline was there and could not recall whether the window or its exterior shutter were open at that time. Early in the investigation, Portuguese police even questioned him because his voluntary check led them to suspect he might have handed Madeline to someone through the bedroom window. Around 10 o'clock, Kate carried out her own check of the apartment through the unlocked patio doors at the back. She immediately noticed that the children's bedroom door was wide open, and when she tried to close it, it slammed shut as though caught by a draft, revealing that the bedroom window and shutter were open. Madeline's comfort blanket and soft toy, Cuddle Cat, remained on the bed, but she was gone. After a brief search of the apartment, Kate ran back toward the restaurant, screaming that Madeline had been taken. Within minutes, Jerry sent Matthew to the resort reception to request that the police be called, and shortly thereafter, the resort activated its missing child search protocol. Staff and guests, numbering around 60, searched until the early hours of the morning, initially assuming that Madeline may have wandered off, while calls of her name echoed across the village of Praia da Luz, from one end to the other, as desperate searchers combed the streets and surrounding areas. 2 officers from the Portuguese Gendarmerie, the Guarda Nacional Republicana, arrived at the resort from the nearby town of Lagos shortly after the report of Madeline's disappearance. And after a brief search, they alerted the criminal police, the Policia Judiciaria in Portimao. Kate later recalled that the PJ arrived a short time afterward, and according to their records, they reached the resort within minutes of being notified. Later in the early hours, patrol dogs were brought in to assist the search, followed by additional search and rescue dogs at dawn. Police officers had their leave canceled and immediately began combing the area, examining waterways, wells, caves, sewers, and abandoned ruins around Praia da Luz. Inspector Goncalo Amaral, head of the PJ in Portimao, was appointed coordinator of the inquiry. Despite these efforts, it was widely acknowledged that mistakes were made during the critical hours following the disappearance. Neither the border nor marine police were given descriptions of Madeline for many hours, and house-to-house searches were not conducted immediately. Roadblocks were reportedly only set up the following morning, and police did not request motorway surveillance images of vehicles leaving Praia da Luz or traveling the road toward the Spanish border. The company responsible for monitoring the roads later confirmed they were not contacted, and it took Interpol several days to issue a global missing person alert. Not everyone who had been at the resort was interviewed, with some holidaymakers later contacting British police to report that no one had spoken to them during the initial investigation, leaving significant gaps in the early response that might have been critical in locating Madeline. The crime scene at apartment 5, it was not properly secured in the hours following Madeline's disappearance. Portuguese police collected samples from the children's bedroom, which were sent to 3 forensic laboratories, and it was later reported that DNA from an unknown individual had been found. However, around 20 people had entered the apartment before it was closed off, compromising potential evidence. According to Kate, an officer placed tape across the doorway of the children's bedroom, but left in the early hours without properly securing the apartment. The PJ case file revealed that the apartment remained empty for a month after the disappearance before being rented out to tourists, and it was only sealed off again in August for further forensic testing. Outside the apartment, a crowd gathered by the front door and near the children's bedroom window, through which an abductor may have entered or exited, trampling over potential evidence. In one particularly careless incident, an officer dusted the exterior shutter of the bedroom window for fingerprints without wearing gloves or any protective clothing, further compromising the integrity of the scene and raising questions about the early handling of the investigation. In the United Kingdom, it was decided that Madeline's home force, Leicestershire Police, would coordinate the British response to her disappearance, although the official inquiry remained under Portuguese jurisdiction. A strategic coordinating group, often referred to as the Gold Group, was formed representing Leicestershire Police, the Serious Organized Crime Agency, the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Center, and the National Police Improvement Agency. The Portuguese police provided a room for the British team to work, but reportedly resented their presence, while the British team was accustomed to feeding information into the centralized Homes 2 system. In Portugal, all information was collected in boxes, creating delays and inefficiencies. Additionally, the PJ operated under different constraints than British police, often needing magistrates' approval for actions, which slowed the investigation. Jim Gamble, head of COP at the time, later recalled that Portuguese authorities appeared to feel condescended to, and that the British presence was sometimes perceived as acting like a colonial power, highlighting the tension and cultural challenges in coordinating the international response to Madeline's disappearance. From the earliest days of the investigation, Portuguese police were reportedly suspicious of the McCanns, in part due to the intense media attention surrounding the case. Jerry later acknowledged that he had deliberately sought to keep Madeline in the public eye, describing it as a way to market her. A series of public relations consultants arrived in Praia da Luz to manage media relations, which the local police deeply resented, seeing the attention as counterproductive to the investigation. Initially, Alex Woolfall of the British PR firm Bell Pottinger, representing the holiday company, handled the media for the first 10 days. He was followed by government press officers, beginning with Sherry Dodd, a former journalist, and then Clarence Mitchell, who served as Director of Media Monitoring for the Central Office of Information. After Mitchell's government duties ended, the McCanns hired Justine McGuinness, reportedly headhunted for the role, and then briefly engaged Hanover Communications under Charles Lewington, formerly a private secretary to John Major. In September, a benefactor offered to fund Mitchell's salary so he could return, allowing him to resign from his government position and work full-time for the McCanns, later receiving payment through Madeline's fund. This unprecedented level of professional media management reflected the McCanns' determination to maintain public attention on Madeline, even as it created tension with the Portuguese authorities overseeing the investigation that on the 15th of May 2007, the McCanns established Madeline's fund. leaving no stone unturned Ltd to raise both money and awareness for her disappearance. And its website drew extraordinary attention, receiving tens of millions of hits in just the first few days. Throughout May and June, their PR team organized a series of high-profile events to maintain media focus on the case, including visits to the Portuguese city of Fatima, as well as trips to Holland, Germany, Spain, and Morocco. On the 30th of May, the couple flew to Rome in a private jet to meet Pope Benedict XVI, a visit arranged by the Archbishop of Westminster, an event accompanied by extensive media coverage. The following month, balloons were released in hundreds of cities worldwide to promote the search. By early June, journalists were already noting the professionalism of the campaign, describing it as extraordinary and, at times, troubling, given its scale and sophistication. Madeline's image appeared on the cover of People magazine and on the front pages of British tabloids almost daily for months, and she became a constant feature in news outlets, including Sky News menus. Portuguese newspapers, notably Correio de Manha, published hundreds of articles about her, while online searches for her name returned thousands of videos and millions of comments, reflecting an unprecedented global media phenomenon designed to keep attention focused firmly on her disappearance. 12 days after Madeline's disappearance, Robert Murat, a British-Portuguese property consultant, became the first official suspect in the case. Born in Hammersmith, West London, he lived in his mother's house, just a short distance from the McCann's apartment, in the direction that the man in the Tanner sighting had been seen walking. Murat came under suspicion after a journalist informed Portuguese police that he had been asking questions about the case. He had previously been registered briefly as an interpreter for the PJ, claiming he wanted to help because he had a daughter of a similar age to Madeline. Several members of the Tapas 7, along with an Ocean Club nanny and 2 British holidaymakers, reported seeing him outside apartment 5A shortly after the disappearance. Though given his proximity to the apartment, this was not unusual. Murat and his mother maintained that he had been at home all evening, yet suspicion from the McCann circle was intense, with one supporter even offering a journalist exclusive access to new developments if he reported back on how the press was covering Murat. Beginning in mid-May, Portuguese police searched his home, drained his pool, examined his cars, computers, phones, and videotapes, combed his garden with sniffer dogs and ground radar, and questioned 2 of his associates. In the months that followed, tensions escalated further, including an incident in which one of Murat's associates had his car set on fire, with the word "Speak" painted on the pavement nearby, underscoring the extraordinary pressure and scrutiny surrounding the first suspect in the investigation. There was ultimately no evidence linking Robert Murat or his friends to Madeline's disappearance, and his status as a formal suspect was lifted when the case was archived, though in the months prior he had pursued legal action against media outlets for defamation, receiving substantial out-of-court settlements, with his friends also compensated. Years later, during the renewed Operation Grange investigation, Murat, his wife, and one of his friends were questioned again on behalf of Scotland Yard, reflecting ongoing efforts to examine all leads. Murat's mother later added her account of suspicious activity outside apartment 5A on the night of the disappearance, recalling that she had driven past and seen a young woman in a plum-colored top behaving oddly in a small brown rental car, speeding in the wrong direction down a one-way street. Details she claimed to have reported to the police at the time. In addition, statements from other witnesses described men acting strangely near the apartment, both in the days leading up to and on the day of Madeline's disappearance. Scotland Yard came to consider that these individuals might have been conducting reconnaissance for a potential abduction or burglary. This concern was heightened by a notable increase in burglaries in the area, including multiple break-ins at the McCann's block in the weeks before Madeline went missing, with intruders known to have entered through windows. In the weeks leading up to Madeline's disappearance, several witnesses reported men behaving strangely around apartment 5, often collecting money for charitable causes that appeared fictitious. On one occasion in April, a bedraggled man approached a tourist near 5A claiming to seek donations for an orphanage in nearby Espiche, though no such orphanage existed, and the witness described him as pushy and intimidating. Days later, a man accessed the balcony of apartment 5A via the street steps, politely requesting money for an orphanage. And on the day of the disappearance, two pairs of men approached British residents in the streets near 5A with similar stories, soliciting funds for hostels or hospices. In addition to these charity collectors, a number of blonde-haired men were seen loitering around or observing 5A in the days before and on the day Madeline went missing. On May 2nd, one was observed across the road, apparently watching the apartment, and he had also been spotted days earlier near the Ocean Club. The granddaughter of the previous tenants saw a similar man leaning against a wall behind the apartments, and again near the Tapas restaurant, noting his mid-30s appearance, cropped hair, and distinctive spots. In the hours leading up to the disappearance, witnesses saw men staring at the McCann's block near a parked white van, moving through gates and stairwells, or lingering on nearby balconies, often checking their surroundings before quietly leaving. On the day Madeline vanished, specific sightings included blonde-haired men on the balcony of a nearby empty apartment, near 5A in the late afternoon, and in the stairwell of the McCann's block, culminating after the disappearance with two seen in a nearby street speaking in raised voices, who lowered their tones and walked away once noticed. These repeated observations of suspicious activity contributed to a broader picture of potential reconnaissance or unusual interest in the McCann's apartment, heightening concern among investigators and residents alike. The first sign that public and media opinion was turning against the McCanns emerged during a press conference in Berlin, when a journalist directly asked whether they were involved in Madeline's disappearance. Weeks later, a lengthy article in a Portuguese weekly suggested that the McCanns were suspects, emphasizing alleged inconsistencies in their statements and insinuating that the Tanner sighting had been fabricated. The reporters had apparently obtained the mobile numbers of the Tapas 7 and another key witness, indicating that the inquiry had been compromised by leaks. Subsequent media coverage, both in Portugal and followed closely in the UK, propagated numerous unverified allegations that would continue to shadow the McCanns on social media for years, including claims that they and the Tapas 7 were swingers, that the children had been sedated, and that the group had formed a pact of silence about the events of the night of the disappearance. Much attention was drawn to supposed contradictions within and between the statements of the McCanns and the Tapas 7, a situation complicated by the fact that interviews were conducted in Portuguese and translated by an interpreter, with the statements then typed in Portuguese and verbally translated back into English for the participants to sign, creating further room for misunderstanding and speculation. Investigators also noted apparent inconsistencies in the McCanns' accounts of how they had entered apartment 5A when checking on the children. Early interviews suggested they had used the locked front door for their evening checks. Yet in subsequent interviews, Jerry stated that they had entered through the unlocked patio doors at the back, which could only be opened from the inside and had been deliberately left unlocked to allow them access. Questions were also raised about whether the front door had been locked and why Kate, upon discovering Madeline was missing, ran to the Tapas restaurant, leaving the twins alone in the apartment rather than using her mobile phone or shouting from the balcony. Another point of contention concerned the exterior shutter over Madeline's bedroom window, a roller-style blind with metal slats that locked in place when lowered and could normally only be raised from inside using a strap. Kate maintained the shutter and window were closed when Madeline went to bed, but open when she found her missing, while Jerry described lowering the shutter himself and then going outside, discovering it could only be raised from the outside. Portuguese police, however, insisted that the shutter could not be raised from outside without force, which would have been noisy, and yet there was no evidence of forced entry, leaving investigators and the media with unresolved questions about the circumstances of Madeline's disappearance and the parents' movements that evening. Investigators also noted apparent inconsistencies in the McCanns' accounts of how they had entered apartment 5A when checking on the children. Early interviews suggested they had used the locked front door for their evening checks. Yet in subsequent interviews, Jerry stated that they had entered through the unlocked patio doors at the back, which could only be opened from the inside and had been deliberately left unlocked to allow them access. Questions were also raised about whether the front door had been locked and why Kate, upon discovering Madeline was missing, ran to the Tapas restaurant, leaving the twins alone in the apartment rather than using her mobile phone or shouting from the balcony. Another point of contention concerned the exterior shutter over Madeline's bedroom window, a roller-style blind with metal slats that locked in place when lowered and could normally only be raised from inside using a strap. Kate maintained the shutter and window were closed when Madeline went to bed, but open when she found her missing, while Jerry described lowering the shutter himself and then going outside, discovering it could only be raised from the outside. Portuguese police, however, insisted that the shutter could not be raised from outside without force, which would have been noisy, and yet there was no evidence of forced entry, leaving investigators and the media with unresolved questions about the circumstances of Madeline's disappearance and the parents' movements that evening. In late June 2007, the McCanns suggested to the Policia Judiciaria that assistance be sought from Danny Krugel, a former South African police officer who claimed to have developed a matter orientation system, a handheld device he asserted could locate missing persons using DNA and satellite technology. Scientists reviewing these claims years later described them as implausible. But at the time, the McCanns, desperate for leads, engaged Krugel, sending him hair and eyelashes collected from Madeline by relatives in the UK. He arrived in Praia da Luz in mid-July and informed the couple that his equipment had detected a static signal on a section of the beach near the Rocha Negra cliff, offering what he presented as a potential clue to Madeline's whereabouts, though the scientific validity of his methods was widely questioned. Inspector Goncalo Amaral, the officer leading the PJ inquiry, interpreted Kate McCann's engagement with Danny Krugel as a potential ploy, believing by that stage that the McCanns were involved in Madeline's disappearance and that Kate might be attempting to use Krugel or even psychics to reveal the location of her daughter's body without implicating herself. Acting on this suspicion, the PJ sent a letter rogatory to the British authorities requesting assistance in the search for Madeline. In response, Mark Harrison, the National Search Advisor for the NPIA, arrived in Praia da Luz to inspect the search areas on foot and from a helicopter. While describing Krugel's methods as highly unlikely, Harrison's report noted that a large-scale search had already taken place, but that most officers involved lacked formal search training, aside from a specialized search and rescue team from Lisbon, and that search dogs had been deployed later than recommended. He advised targeted searches of key locations, including the beach and shoreline near the village, Robert Morat's property, Apartment 5A, the Tapas 7's apartments, and any hire vehicles, and recommended the use of ground-penetrating radar along with specialized sniffer dogs brought in from South Yorkshire, highlighting the need for systematic procedures to maximize the chances of locating Madeline. Specialist British sniffer dogs were brought to Praia da Luz to assist with the investigation. Keela, trained to give a passive alert to the scent of human blood by freezing near it, and Eddie, an enhanced victim recovery dog conditioned to bark in response to the scent of human cadavers, even if recently deceased, buried, incinerated, or submerged, and not for any other reason. The dogs were taken to Apartment 5A, nearby Wasteland, and the beach, were both alerted behind the living room sofa, and Eddie also gave a response near the wardrobe in the main bedroom, while no alerts occurred on the beach or Wasteland. Subsequently, the PJ obtained warrants to search the house the McCanns had rented on Rua das Flores and the silver Renault Scenic they had hired several weeks after Madeline's disappearance. During the search of the house and grounds, Eddie reacted to Cuddle Cat in the living room, while Keela gave no alert. Police removed boxes containing the McCanns' clothes, the toy, a pair of latex gloves, suitcases, a notepad, 2 diaries including one Kate had started after the disappearance, and a friend's Bible. A passage marked in the Bible about the death of a child was copied into the case file with a Portuguese translation. At a different location, Eddie alerted to one of the boxes of clothes. Those sources close to the McCanns' lawyers suggested that if any corpse odor was present on Kate's clothing, it could have been the result of her professional contact with deceased patients in her work as a family doctor, highlighting both the complexity and the contested nature of the forensic findings. Following the removal of the Renault Scenic, Keela and Eddie were taken to an underground car park opposite the PJ headquarters in Portimao. where several vehicles were parked with significant spacing, including the McCann's car and Robert Murat's. Eddie, the cadaver dog, gave a clear alert outside the McCann's car by the driver's door, and the following morning Keela alerted to the rear driver's side inside the boot and to the map compartment in the driver's door, which contained the ignition key and key ring. When the key ring was hidden beneath sand in a fire bucket, Keela alerted once more, repeating the response when the bucket was moved to another level of the car park. Almost immediately after these alerts, the Portuguese press began publishing stories suggesting that Madeline had died inside apartment 5A, intensifying public speculation and shaping media narratives even as the investigation continued. Hair and other fibers collected from areas of the Renault and apartment 5A, where Keela and Eddie had alerted, were sent to the Forensic Science Service in Birmingham for DNA profiling, arriving in early August 2007. By this time, according to reports, the PJ had largely abandoned the abduction theory. Without waiting for the DNA results from Birmingham, Portuguese police summoned the McCanns to a meeting in Portimão, where senior officials, including Gil Hermino Encarnação, the PJ regional director, and Luis Neves, coordinator of the Direco Central de Combate ao Banditismo in Lisbon, informed them that the case had been reclassified as a murder inquiry. On that day, both Kate and Jerry McCann were interrogated, with officers suggesting that Kate's recollections of events might be unreliable. Years later, Encarnação's death from stomach cancer was noted by media outlets as the loss of a major source of leaks and speculation surrounding the McCanns, reflecting how the investigation had shifted focus and intensified scrutiny on the parents while the DNA results were still pending. The Forensic Science Service in Birmingham conducted testing using a technique known as low copy number DNA analysis, designed for situations where only a few cells are available, but controversial due to its vulnerability to contamination and potential for misinterpretation. In early September, John Lowe of the FSS emailed Detective Superintendent Stuart Pryor of Leicestershire Police, who acted as liaison between the British and Portuguese authorities, explaining that a sample taken from the boot of the Renault contained 15 of 19 of Madeline's DNA components. Lowe emphasized that the result was extremely complex, as it appeared to originate from at least 3 individuals and possibly up to 5, making the profile difficult to interpret meaningfully. He noted that while most of Madeline's DNA components were present in the sample, the overall complexity meant it was impossible to determine definitively whether the match was genuine or merely coincidental, leaving the findings inconclusive and highlighting the challenges of relying on LCN testing in a high-profile investigation with multiple potential contributors. John Lowe's email into Portuguese in early September 2007. The PJ reportedly suggested to Kate McCann that if she were to admit that Madeline had died accidentally in apartment 5A and that she had concealed the body, she might face a prison sentence of only a couple of years while her husband would not be charged and could leave freely. Both Kate and Jerry McCann were formally made arguido later that month and were advised by their lawyer not to answer questions. During the process, the PJ informed Jerry that Madeline's DNA had been identified in the boot of the Renault and behind the sofa in the apartment. Jerry did respond to some of the questions posed to him, but Kate declined to answer dozens of questions over the course of an 11-hour interview, marking the beginning of a period in which both parents were officially under investigation and heavily scrutinized while the wider case continued to unfold. Journalists in Portugal were told that the DNA evidence recovered from the Renault and apartment 5A was a 100% match, leading to sensationalized headlines in the British press, including claims of a corpse being found in the McCann's car and reports of a clump of Madeline's hair discovered there. These leaks originated directly from Portuguese police, as later testified by reporters, and contributed to an intense media frenzy around the McCanns. Leicestershire Police, led by Matt Baggett, chose not to correct these reports, citing the importance of maintaining a cooperative relationship with the PJ, who were in charge of the investigation, and prioritizing the ongoing search for Madeline over publicly challenging the stories, even as the coverage fueled widespread speculation and public scrutiny of her parents. Despite their arguido status, the McCanns were permitted to leave Portugal and following legal advice, returned to England. Immediately, arriving in early September 2007. The next day, Chief Inspector Tavares Almeida of the PJ in Portimao signed a report concluding that Madeline had died in apartment 5A as a result of an accident, that the restaurant meal and the apparent regular checks on the children had been part of a deliberate cover-up, and that the Tapas 7 had assisted in misleading the police, with the McCanns allegedly concealing their daughter's body before faking an abduction. An accompanying analysis from the Information Analysis Brigade in Lisbon examined claimed inconsistencies in the parent statements, while the public prosecutor handed the 10-volume case file to a judge and applied for the seizure of Kate's diary and Jerry's laptop. The report also included requests to trace telephone communications between the McCanns and the Tapas 7 and detailed the number of suitcases the group had taken back to England, illustrating the thorough scrutiny applied to their movements and actions in the immediate aftermath of the disappearance. In late September 2007, a leaked diplomatic cable revealed that the United States ambassador to Portugal, Al Hoffman, had reported a meeting with the British ambassador, Alexander Ellis, in which Ellis acknowledged that the British police had developed the current evidence against the McCann parents and emphasized that authorities from both countries were cooperating, noting that the media frenzy was expected and acceptable provided official comments remain confidential. Around the same time, Control Risks, a British security company funded by an anonymous donor to assist the McCanns since early May, collected hair samples from the McCann twins at their parents' request, concerned that the children, who had slept through the commotion in apartment 5A after Madeline's disappearance, might have been given sedatives by an abductor. Kate also requested a sample from herself to address allegations that she was taking medication, and testing found no trace of drugs. In early October 2007, Chief Inspector Goncalo Amaral was removed from his role as coordinator of the Madeline McCann inquiry and transferred to Faro after telling the Diario de Noticias that British police had pursued only leads beneficial to the McCanns, citing their investigation of an anonymous email to Prince Charles that suggested a former Ocean Club employee had taken Madeline as an example of this bias. Amaral himself had been made an arguido the day after Madeline's disappearance in connection with his investigation of another case, the 2004 disappearance of 8-year-old Joana Cipriano from Figueira, approximately 7 miles from Praia da Luz. Cipriano's body was never recovered, and no murder weapon was identified. Her mother and uncle were convicted after initially confessing, though the mother later retracted her statement, claiming police had beaten her. Amaral was accused of covering up for colleagues involved in the alleged mistreatment, though he was not present during the incident, and the other detectives were acquitted. In May 2009, Amaral was convicted of perjury related to the Cipriano case and received an 18-month suspended sentence, marking a controversial turn in his career that coincided with his departure from the McCann investigation. After Goncalo Amaral's removal, the Madeline McCann inquiry was taken over by Paulo Rebelo, Deputy National Director of the Policia Judiciaria, who expanded the team of detectives and began a comprehensive case review. On November 29, 2007, from members of the Portuguese inquiry, including Francisco Corte Real, Vice President of Portugal's Forensic Crime Service, were briefed at Leicestershire Police Headquarters by the Forensic Science Service, and in April 2008 the Tapas 7 were interviewed in England by Leicestershire Police with the PJ present. The PJ had planned in December 2007 to hold a reconstruction of the disappearance in Praia da Luz using the McCanns and Tapas 7 rather than actors, but the group declined to participate, highlighting the increasingly strained relationship between the McCanns and Portuguese police. This tension was evident again that month when transcripts of the couple's interviews with the PJ were leaked to Spanish television on the same day they were at the European Parliament promoting a monitoring system for missing children. Following the media fallout, the national director of the PJ, Alapio Ribeiro, resigned, having previously criticized the haste with which the McCanns were named suspects. By May 2008, Portuguese prosecutors were examining several potential charges against the couple, including child abandonment, abduction, homicide, and concealment of a corpse, illustrating the continued complexity and contentious nature of the investigation that on July 21, 2008, the Portuguese Attorney General, Fernando Jose Pinto Montero, announced that there was no evidence linking the McCanns or Robert Murat to Madeline's disappearance, lifting their arguido status and formally closing the case. On August 4th, Portugal's Ministério Público released 17 case files on CD-ROM to the media, totaling 11,233 pages, including 2,550 pages documenting sightings. The files also contained a 58-page prosecutor's report, which concluded that no element of proof whatsoever was found which allows us to form any lucid, sensible, serious, and honest conclusion about the circumstances. In 2009, Portugal released a further 2,000 pages of documentation. Days after the case closure, excerpts from Kate McCann's diary, taken by the PJ in August 2007, were published in translation by the Portuguese tabloid Correio da Manhã, despite a Portuguese judge having ruled in June 2008 that the seizure violated her privacy and that any copies should be destroyed. Later, on September 14, 2008, the News of the World tabloid in the UK published the extracts without permission, using an improper retranslation into English, continuing the controversy surrounding the handling and public dissemination of sensitive materials from the investigation. Tensions between the McCanns and the PJ remain high even after the case closure, leading Chief Inspector Goncalo Amaral to resign from the force in June 2008 and write a book in which he alleged that Madeline had died in apartment 5A and that her parents had faked an abduction to cover it up. 3 days after the inquiry was formally closed, Amaral's book, Maddie, A Verdade de Mentira, Maddie, The Truth of the Lie, was published in Portugal by Guerra and Paz. By November 2008, the book had sold 180,000 copies, and by 2010 it had been translated into 6 languages. A documentary based on the book was broadcast on TVI in Portugal in April 2009, drawing an audience of 2.2 million viewers and further fueling the public debate surrounding the case. In 2009, the McCanns launched a libel action against Goncalo Amaral and his publisher, with Madeline's fund covering the legal fees. In 2015, they were initially awarded over 600,000 euros in damages, but Amaral's appeal succeeded in 2016. A judge had issued an injunction against further publication or sales of the book in 2009, which the Lisbon Court of Appeal overturned in 2010 on the grounds that it violated Amaral's freedom of expression. The publication ban was reinstated in 2015 as part of the libel ruling, then lifted following Amaral's successful appeal in 2016. The McCanns subsequently appealed to Portugal's Supreme Court, which ruled against them in February 2017, noting in its 76-page decision that they had not been formally cleared by the archiving of the criminal case in 2008. In March 2017, the Supreme Court rejected the McCanns' final appeal, bringing an end to the legal proceedings surrounding Amaral's book. 12 days after Madeline's disappearance. On May 15, 2007, the McCanns established Madeline's fund, leaving no stone unturned limited to raise money and awareness for the search. Within the first 3 months, the fund's website attracted over 80 million visits. From September 2007, Brian Kennedy, the businessman behind Everest Windows, became a financial supporter of the couple, and his lawyer joined the fund's board of directors. By February 2017, the fund had 7 directors, including the McCanns themselves. Public appeals were widely promoted, including screenings at football matches across the UK. And between May 2007 and March 2008, the fund received £1,846,178 of donations, approximately £1.4 million through bank transfers, £390,000 online, and £64,000 for merchandise sales. High-profile contributions included £250,000 each from the News of the World and Sir Philip Green, $50,000 from Simon Cowell, £25,000 from Colleen Rooney, as well as substantial donations from J.K. Rowling and Richard Branson, the latter giving £100,000 to the McCanns Legal Fund. While the fund did not cover legal costs related to the couple's arguido status, it drew criticism in October 2007 for having paid 2 of the McCanns' mortgage installments before they were made suspects. A reward of £2.5 million was also offered by various donors, including the News of the World, Rolling, Branson, Green, and Scottish businessman Stephen Wynyard. In March 2008. Express newspapers paid Madeline's fund £550,000 and £375,000 in libel damages over articles about the McCanns and the Tapas 7, respectively. And in 2011, Kate McCann's book Madeline was serialized by the Sunday Times and The Sun, both owned by News International, earning the fund between £500,000 and £1 million by December 2015. The fund stood at around £750,000. The fund also hired several private investigators, which at times caused friction with Portuguese police, and shortly after Madeline's disappearance, an anonymous benefactor funded the British security company Control Risks. There were reportedly 4 independent sightings of a child matching Madeline's description in North Africa, and in September 2007, Brian Kennedy traveled to Morocco to investigate one lead. A Norwegian woman reported seeing a girl resembling Madeline at a petrol station near Marrakesh on May 9, 2007, with the child allegedly asking the man she was with in English, "Can we see Mummy soon?" Upon returning to Spain, the witness contacted the Spanish police, but a month later, Kate McCann stated that the woman had not been formally interviewed, raising concerns that leads were not being pursued. To raise awareness, the McCanns traveled to Morocco on June 10, 2007, stayed at the British ambassador's residence, and were briefed by consular staff and a Metropolitan Police attaché. In 2008, Madeline's fund hired Oakley International, a Washington, D.C. registered detective agency, for over £500,000 for 6 months. Oakley sent a 5-man team to Portugal led by Henri Exton, a former British police officer who had worked for MI5, to conduct undercover operations within the Ocean Club, among pedophile rings, and within the Roma community. Exton questioned the significance of the Tanner sighting and instead focused on the report by Martin and Mary Smith, who had seen a man carrying a child toward the beach, producing e-fits based on their description. This sighting was sensitive because Martin had recently watched BBC coverage of the McCanns return to the UK and initially thought Jerry McCann was the man he had seen, though he later accepted he was mistaken, as Jerry had been in the Tapas restaurant at the time. Despite this, the Smith e-fits bore some resemblance to Jerry and could fuel conspiracy theories. Exton submitted his report to the fund in November 2008, recommending release of the e-fits, but the fund insisted both the report and e-fits remain confidential. Relations had soured due to a fee dispute, and because the report suggested Madeline may have died in an accident after leaving the apartment through its unlocked patio doors. The e-fits were shared with the Portuguese Polícia Judiciária, Leicestershire Police, and later Scotland Yard, but not published elsewhere. Kate McCann did not include them in her 2011 book, Madeline, though she emphasized the Tanner and Smith sightings' importance. Scotland Yard eventually released the e-fits in October 2013 for a BBC Crime Watch reconstruction, after which the Sunday Times reported that the McCanns had possessed the e-fits since 2008. The couple complained that the article implied they had withheld them from the police, leading the newspaper to publish an apology in December 2013, and the McCanns later received £55,000 in damages, which Jerry said would be donated to charity. In 2009, the McCanns met with the British Home Secretary Alan Johnson to request a review of the case, leading Johnson to commission a scoping report from Jim Gamble of COP. By March 2010, the Home Office had begun discussions with the Association of Chief Police Officers, ACPO, about establishing a British inquiry. Delivered in May 2010, the Gamble report examined how multiple British agencies, including COP, Leicestershire Police, Metropolitan Police Service, SOCA, MPIA, Crime Stoppers, the Home Office, the Foreign Office, and 10 Downing Street, had become involved in the search for Madeline. Gamble criticized the lack of coordination, noting that while everyone wanted to help, some were primarily motivated to be seen to help, which created a sense of chaos and a sense of competition that hampered the investigation and caused resentment among the Portuguese police. He recommended renewed cooperation between British and Portuguese authorities, full exchange of all relevant information, analysis of telephone calls made on the night of the disappearance, and pursuit of all leads, including those developed by private investigators in May 2011. Under Home Secretary Theresa May, Scotland Yard launched an investigative review, Operation Grange, with a team of 29 detectives and 8 civilians, an initiative reportedly influenced by a News International campaign. Via The Sun, the extent to which the request resulted from threats or persuasion from News International Chief Executive Rebekah Brooks was later examined at the Leveson inquiry. On May 11, 2011, as The Sun serialized Kate McCann's book, Madeline, the front page featured an open letter from the McCanns asking Prime Minister David Cameron to establish a new inquiry, with 20,000 people signing the newspaper's petition that day. That same day, May testified at Leveson, stating she had telephoned Brooks and Dominic Mohan, editor of The Sun. The following day, she wrote to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Paul Stevenson, noting that Portuguese authorities had agreed to cooperate with a British inquiry. Within 24 hours, Cameron announced Operation Grange, to be financed through a Home Office contingency fund. The operation was led by Commander Simon Foy, with Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood as the first senior investigating officer, reporting to Detective Chief Superintendent Hamish Campbell. The team included 3 detective inspectors, 5 detective sergeants, 19 detective constables, and around 6 civilian staff. By July 2013, the review had escalated into a formal investigation, and when Redwood retired in 2014, he was replaced by DCI Nicola Wall. The Operation Grange team translated tens of thousands of documents, released an age-progressed image of Madeline, and investigated over 8,000 potential sightings. By 2015, they had taken 1,338 statements, collected 1,027 exhibits, and investigated 650 sex offenders along with 60 persons of interest. The inquiry was scaled back in October 2015, reducing the number of officers to 4. The Home Secretary approved additional funding of £95,000 in April 2016 for what Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Bernard Hoganhow described as one remaining line of inquiry, followed by £85,000 to cover the period up to September 2017, and £150,000 to extend operations until March 31st, 2019, bringing the total cost of the investigation to £11.75 million. The Home Office indicated that similar funding would be approved for 2019. In September 2025, the Metropolitan Police requested an interview with Christian Bruckner ahead of his release from a German prison, but he declined to participate. In September 2018, the Home Office confirmed that it was considering a request from the Metropolitan Police to extend funding for Operation Grange until the end of March 2019, by which time the investigation had cost £11.6 million. In November 2018, an additional £150,000 was granted as part of a series of 6-month extensions, bringing the total cost to approximately £11.75 million. In June 2019, the British government announced that it would continue funding Operation Grange until March 2020. By May 2024, the Home Office approved up to £192,000 for the 2024-25 financial year, supporting a part-time team of 3 police officers and 1 staff member, which increased the total cost of the investigation to £13.2 million as of March 31st, 2024. In 2025, ministers granted a further £108,000 to continue the inquiry through the 2025-26 financial year. Operation Grange, under DCI Redwood, focused on the possibility of a criminal act by a stranger, most likely a planned abduction or a burglary that Madeline had inadvertently interrupted. Local burglaries in the area had reportedly increased fourfold between January and May 2007, including 2 incidents in the McCann's apartment block in the 17 days before her disappearance, both involving intruders entering through windows. In April 2017, shortly before the 10th anniversary of Madeline's disappearance, Scotland Yard's Assistant Commissioner Mark Rowley appeared to downplay the burglary theory, though he stated it was not entirely ruled out, adding that police had largely dismissed the suspect associated with burglaries in the area. Detectives were instead concentrating on a small number of lines of inquiry considered significant. And there were also reports that Scotland Yard was searching for a woman seen near the McCann's apartment at the time of the disappearance. In 2013, DCI Redwood suggested that, on one reading of the evidence, Madeline's disappearance appeared to be a pre-planned abduction, likely involving prior reconnaissance. Several witnesses reported seeing men loitering near apartment 5A in the days leading up to and on the day of the disappearance. In May 2013, Scotland Yard sought to trace 12 manual workers who had been at the Ocean Club, including 6 British cleaners in a white van offering services to British expats. In October, a reconstruction was broadcast on Crime Watch in the UK, Netherlands, and Germany, releasing e-fits of men seen near 5A and of the Smith sighting, prompting Portugal's Attorney General to reopen the inquiry days later, citing new evidence. Another theory suggested that Madeline, nearly 4 at the time, might have left the apartment alone, possibly to look for her parents, and been abducted by a passerby or fallen into a nearby construction site. However, this is widely considered unlikely, as her mother noted that Madeline would have needed to operate multiple doors, gates, and curtains to leave the apartment unnoticed. Using mobile phone tracking and cooperation from over 30 countries, police traced devices used near the Ocean Club during the critical time frame of Madeline's disappearance. This analysis revealed several calls and texts involving a 30-year-old former Ocean Club bus driver and his 24-year-old and 53-year-old associates. All were interviewed in June 2014 and denied any connection to the case. Investigators also found that the phone of Euclides Montero, a former Ocean Club restaurant worker previously fired for theft, had been active near the resort that night. Originally from Cape Verde, Montero died in a tractor accident in 2009. Authorities suspected he may have been breaking into apartments to support a drug habit, though his widow said he had previously been questioned about break-ins involving sexual assaults on children and had been cleared by DNA evidence. In March 2014, Scotland Yard issued an appeal for information regarding a man who had entered holiday homes occupied by British families in 4 incidents in the Western Algarve between 2004 and 2006, including 2 in Praia da Luz, sexually assaulting 5 girls, aged 7 to 10 in their beds. The suspect spoke English with a foreign accent, with slow or possibly slurred speech, and had short, dark, unkempt hair, tan skin, and a distinctive odor noticed by 3 victims. He may have worn a long-sleeved burgundy top, possibly with a white circle on the back. These incidents were part of a total of 12 reported in the area between 2004 and 2010. Portuguese authorities reportedly believed that Euclides Montero, a former Ocean Club worker, was the intruder in the 2004 to 2006 attacks. In June 2014, Scotland Yard officers, accompanied by PJ detectives, archaeologists, and sniffer dogs, searched drains and excavated 60,000 square meters, 15 acres, of wasteland in Praia da Luz, but found nothing. The following month, at Scotland Yard's request, the PJ interviewed 4 Portuguese citizens, including one man previously questioned shortly after the disappearance and an associate of Robert Murat. No evidence implicated them. In December 2014, 11 people, including 3 Britons, Robert Murat, his wife and her ex-husband, and a former Ocean Club bus driver with 2 associates who had communicated near the Ocean Club around the time of the disappearance, were questioned with 253 questions compiled by Scotland Yard, including direct inquiries, such as "Did you kill Madeline?" and "Where did you hide the body?" While some admitted to breaking into Ocean Club apartments, all denied involvement in Madeline's disappearance. In June 2020, German prosecutors stated they had concrete evidence that Christian Bruckner killed Madeleine McCann, but formal charges were delayed due to uncertainty over which German court had jurisdiction based on his last address. Bruckner, previously convicted of unrelated child sexual abuse and drug trafficking offenses, had been serving a prison sentence in Germany since 2019 for raping a 72-year-old American woman in the Algarve. He was acquitted in 2024 of 5 unrelated sexual offenses committed in Portugal between 2000 and 2017 and is scheduled for release in September 2025. On April 22, 2022, Portuguese authorities granted him arguido status, allowing them to extradite him for formal questioning. Christian Bruckner, who is believed to have been living in a borrowed VW camper van in the Algarve at the time of Madeline's disappearance, was ordered to be investigated for possible involvement by the public prosecutor in the Braunschweig court. The German Federal Criminal Police Office publicly appealed for information through the crime program Aktenzeichen XY, Ungelost on ZDF. German authorities reported receiving useful leads in 2013 following the program, but it took years to gather substantial evidence for prosecution, and additional information is still needed. Prosecutors specifically requested details about Bruckner's phone number and a number that had called him on the day of Madeline's disappearance, which had connected with his line for approximately 30 minutes. A British woman who was Bruckner's girlfriend at the time reported that the night before Madeline's disappearance, he told her, "I have a job to do in Praia de Luz tomorrow. It's a horrible job, but it's something I have to do and it will change my life. You won't be seeing me for a while." The day after Madeline vanished, Bruckner's car, a Jaguar XJR6, was registered to a new owner. Hans Christian Wolters from the public prosecutor's office stated that proceedings were being initiated under the presumption that Madeline was dead based on Bruckner's criminal record. German investigators have focused on Christian Bruckner as a prime suspect in Madeleine McCann's disappearance. In June 2020, prosecutors stated they had concrete evidence linking him to her presumed death, though formal charges were delayed due to jurisdictional issues. Bruckner, who was serving a prison sentence for unrelated sexual offenses, was made arguido by Portuguese authorities in April 2022. German authorities highlighted his presence in the Algarve in 2007, his statements to a then-girlfriend about a horrible job in Praia de Luz, and the transfer of his Jaguar XJR6 the day after the disappearance. In July 2020, German police searched an allotment in Hanover, and in May 2023, Portuguese, German, and British police searched a 1.6 kilometers area near the Arade Dam, approximately 50 kilometers from Praia de Luz, based on Bruckner's phone geolocation near McCann within 5 minutes of her disappearance. German investigators consider it possible he killed Madeline near the dam and disposed of her in the water. In June 2025, a further search of scrubland and abandoned buildings between Praia de Luz and Bruckner's former residence was conducted using heavy machinery and ground-penetrating radar, with the cooperation of Portuguese authorities. On September 17, 2025, Christian Bruckner was released from Sane prison after serving a 7-year sentence for raping a woman in Portugal's Algarve region. As part of his release conditions, he was required to wear an electronic tag and surrender his passport. Following his release, Bruckner moved first to Kiel and then Neumünster, but negative publicity forced him to relocate for his safety. By early October 2025, he was living on social welfare payments of 1,000 euros per month, constantly moving between motels and homeless shelters across Germany. In parallel, other lines of inquiry continued. Portuguese police had initially reviewed images seized from pedophile investigations, showing some to the McCanns in case they recognized suspect from Praia de Luz. Several British pedophiles were also investigated, including Raymond Hewlett, who allegedly claimed to know what happened to Madeline, but later retracted his statement before dying of cancer in Germany in December 2009. Scotland Yard additionally pursued 2 men who had been jailed in Scotland for murder since 2010. They had been operating a window cleaning service in the Canary Islands at the time of Madeline's disappearance. Operation Grange also investigated several other individuals of interest. A man from Northern Ireland, who had been released from prison for sexually assaulting his 4 daughters, was living in Carvero, about 40 kilometers from Praia de Luz, at the time of Madeline's disappearance. He died in 2013. Urs Hans von Esch, a Swiss man who had been implicated in the 2007 murder of 5-year-old Ilenia Leonard in Switzerland and was living in Spain when Madeline went missing, was also examined. In June 2016, Officers interviewed an alleged victim of the deceased broadcaster Clement Freud, who had a history of child sexual abuse allegations and owned a home in Praia da Luz. Freud had befriended the McCanns in July 2007, several weeks after Madeline disappeared, though his family stated he had been in the UK at the time. Elise O'Hanlon observed that Madeline McCann's disappearance could almost stand as a metaphor for the rise of social media as the predominant mode of public discourse, with Twitter, just 1 year old at the time, becoming a major source of vitriol. Even 10 years later, the hashtag McCann hashtag generated over 100 tweets an hour, according to University of Huddersfield researchers. Online attacks included a threat to kidnap one of the McCann's twins, and during Scotland Yard and Crime Watch's 2013 reconstruction, there was talk of phoning in false information to sabotage the appeal. In 2013, a man who ran an anti-McCann website received a 3-month suspended sentence after distributing leaflets with allegations in the McCann's village. And in 2014, a Twitter user with 400 anti-McCann posts was found dead from a helium overdose following a confrontation by Sky News. Initially, the McCanns' photogenic, articulate, and professional image worked to their advantage, attracting offers of help from across the United Kingdom, including 10 Downing Street. They leveraged this attention by hiring public relations consultants and holding regular events to maintain media interest. However, the media frenzy eventually turned against them, leading to what PR consultant Michael Cole described as the monstering of the McCanns. They were heavily criticized for leaving their children alone in an unlocked apartment, despite the availability of Ocean Club babysitters and a creche, with commentators arguing that a working-class couple might have faced child abandonment charges. In June 2007, an online petition calling for Leicestershire Social Services to investigate the matter gathered 17,000 signatures. Kate McCann's appearance and demeanor attracted widespread commentary, much of it from other women, including Booker Prize winner Anne Enright, who critiqued her in the London Review of Books. Kate was often described as cold, controlled, too attractive, too thin, too well-dressed, or too intense. Abduction experts had reportedly advised her not to cry on camera, yet this was interpreted negatively, with the Portuguese tabloid Correio de Manhã citing complaints that she had not shed a single tear. Journalism professor Nicola Gach argued that Kate had joined a long history of mothers suspected of harming their children due to unacceptable maternal behavior, drawing comparisons to Lindy Chamberlain, who was wrongly convicted after her baby was killed by a dingo. Similarities were even made with false claims about Bible passages supposedly highlighted by the women. In November 2011, the McCanns testified before the Leveson Inquiry into British press standards, where it emerged that Peter Hill, editor of the Daily Express, had become obsessed with the couple. Headlines range from Madeline McCann killed by sleeping pills to Maddie sold by hard-up McCanns, while Lord Justice Leveson described the articles as complete piffle, and media commentator Roy Greenslade called them a sustained campaign of vitriol against a grief-stricken family. In addition to legal action against Goncalo Amaral and his publisher, the McCanns and the Tapas 7 brought libel cases against several newspapers. The Daily Express, Daily Star, and their sister Sunday papers, owned by Northern and Shell, published front-page apologies in 2008 and donated £550,000 to Madeline's fund. The Tapas 7 were awarded £375,000 against the same group, also donated to the fund, along with a Daily Express apology. In 2013, the McCanns received £55,000 from the Sunday Times after the newspaper implied they had withheld e-fits from the police. Robert Murat obtained £600,000 in out-of-court settlements for libel concerning 100 articles published by 11 newspapers, including The Sun, News of the World, Daily Express, Sunday Express, Daily Star, London Evening Standard, Daily Mail, Metro, Daily Mirror, Sunday Mirror, and Daily Record. The Observer described this as the largest number of separate UK libel actions brought by one person over a single issue. His two associates were each awarded $100,000, with all three receiving public apologies. Additionally, the British Sky Broadcasting Group, owner of Sky News, paid undisclosed damages in 2008 and agreed to host an apology on its website for 12 months. That on March 15, 2019, Netflix released an 8-part documentary series titled The Disappearance of Madeleine McCann. The series featured interviews with key figures connected to the case, including Jim Gamble, former head of COP, Alan Johnson, former British Home Secretary, Brian Kennedy, the businessman who provided financial support to the McCanns, Justine McGuinness, the McCanns' former spokesperson, Goncalo Amaral, ex-head of the PJ investigation, Robert Murat, the first Arguido, Julian Parabéns, a former private investigator from Atodo 3, Portuguese journalist Sandra Felgueiras, and authors Anthony Summers and Robin Swan, co-writers of Looking for Madeleine, 2014. The McCann family did not participate in the production and actively discouraged others from taking part. Case 3, let me explain. Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. was born on November 8, 1945, in Bath, New York, to Kathleen K. Louise D. Grote and Joseph James DeAngelo Sr., who served as a sergeant in the United States Army. Of Italian descent, Joseph grew up alongside his two sisters, Rebecca and Constance Connie, and his brother John. His early childhood was marked by traumatic experiences. A family relative later revealed that while the family was stationed in West Germany, young Joseph witnessed a horrifying incident in which his sister Connie was sexually assaulted by 2 airmen at a U.S. Air Force Base warehouse. Years after his criminal activities came to light, Rebecca disclosed that Joseph himself had suffered abuse at the hands of their father during his formative years, painting a picture of a deeply troubled and complex upbringing. During his adolescence, Joseph's life followed a path of both education and early criminal behavior. Between 1959 and 1960, he attended Mills Junior High School in Rancho Cordova, California, before moving on to Folsom High School in 1961. Though he left high school without a traditional diploma, he earned a GED in 1964. While at Folsom, he played on the junior varsity baseball team, demonstrating a conventional side to a youth otherwise marked by troubling tendencies. Prosecutors would later report that during his teenage years, Joseph engaged in burglaries, theft of mail, and disturbing acts of cruelty to animals, foreshadowing a darker side that would emerge in adulthood. Joseph's early adulthood included military service, higher education, and specialized police training. In September 1964, he enlisted in the United States Navy and served for nearly 2 years during the Vietnam War, performing duties as a damage control man aboard the cruiser USS Canberra and the destroyer tender USS Piedmont. After completing his military service, he sought higher education, enrolling at Sierra College in Rocklin, California, in August 1968. There, he excelled academically, graduating with honors with an associate degree in police science. His pursuit of a career in law enforcement continued at Sacramento State University, where in 1971 he obtained a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Joseph later undertook postgraduate courses and additional police training at the College of the Sequoias in Visalia. To gain practical experience, he completed a comprehensive 32-week police internship at the Roseville Police Department. These educational and professional achievements laid the groundwork for his entry into law enforcement, a career path that would later contrast starkly with the criminal acts for which he would become notorious. After completing his police training and internship, Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. began his law enforcement career in May 1973, joining the Exeter Police Department as a burglary unit officer. He had relocated from Citrus Heights to take on this role, demonstrating the ambition and drive that had characterized his earlier educational pursuits. For 3 years, he served in Exeter, handling burglary cases and developing practical experience in policing. In August 1976, he transferred to the Auburn Police Department, where he continued to serve until July 1979. However, his tenure in Auburn came to a sudden and ignominious end when he was arrested for shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent. As a result, he was sentenced to 6 months of probation and subsequently terminated from his position in October 1979. During the process of his dismissal, his behavior became increasingly erratic and threatening. He allegedly made threats to kill the police chief and reportedly engaged in stalking the chief's home, signaling a dangerous escalation in his personal conduct. D'Angelo's personal life during this period was marked by turbulent relationships and early signs of manipulation and control. In May 1970, while still pursuing his education at Sierra College, he became engaged to Bonnie Jean Caldwell, a nursing student and classmate. Their relationship quickly deteriorated. By 1971, Caldwell ended the engagement due to Joseph's manipulative and abusive behavior. The situation escalated further when he pressured her to assist him in cheating on an abnormal psychology test, ultimately attempting to force her in a marriage by threatening her with a firearm. Despite these early tumultuous relationships, Joseph entered in a marriage in November 1973, wedding Sharon Marie Huddle of Citrus Heights in a ceremony held in Auburn. The couple established a life together, eventually purchasing a home in Citrus Heights in 1980, a property that would decades later become central to his arrest. They also acquired a second home in Long Beach, where they spent much of the 1980s. Sharon Huddle pursued a career in law, becoming a divorce attorney in 1982, and together they had 3 daughters, 2 born in Sacramento and 1 in Los Angeles. Despite this outwardly conventional family life, Joseph's private criminal activities continued unbeknownst to his wife and children. The family eventually separated in 1991, though the full scope of his criminal history would remain hidden from them for many more years. It was not until July 2018, several months after his arrest, that Sharon formally filed for divorce, which was finalized the following year. Throughout their marriage, D'Angelo had committed the majority of his crimes, yet both his wife and children were unaware of his double life. His eldest daughter described him as a perfect father, and Sharon herself accepted his frequent absences from home as legitimate, never suspecting the heinous activities he was engaged in behind closed doors. During the 1980s, Joseph D'Angelo's work history is largely unclear, though it is believed that he may have held jobs as a computer engineer and possibly as a cashier. By 1990, he had secured a long-term position as a truck mechanic at the Save Mart Supermarkets Distribution Center in Roseville, where he continued working until his retirement in 2017. While his employment appeared stable, he had minor encounters with the law. In 1996, he was arrested for failing to pay for gasoline, though the charge was later dismissed. Despite his outwardly ordinary life, D'Angelo occasionally exhibited alarming behavior. His brother-in-law later claimed that around the time the East Area Rapist was active, he would casually bring up the crimes in conversation, hinting at an unsettling fascination. Neighbors also recalled frequent loud and profane outbursts, sometimes creating tension in his community. One neighbor reported receiving a threatening phone message from D'Angelo, in which he ominously promised to deliver a load of death in response to a barking dog. At the time of his arrest, he was living with a daughter and granddaughter, maintaining the appearance of a typical family life while concealing the disturbing reality of his past actions. The DNA evidence ultimately connected Joseph D'Angelo to 8 murders across California, in the cities of Goleta, Ventura, Dana Point, and Irvine. 2 additional murders in Goleta, although lacking DNA confirmation, were linked to him through similarities in modus operandi, reinforcing the pattern of his crimes. D'Angelo also pleaded guilty to 3 other murders, including 2 in Rancho Cordova and 1 in Visalia. Beyond these killings, he committed over 50 known rapes across multiple California counties, including Sacramento, Contra Costa, Stanislaus, San Joaquin, Alameda, Santa Clara, and Yolo. In addition to violent crimes, he was linked to hundreds of other criminal acts, ranging from theft, burglary, vandalism, and peeping to stalking and prowling, revealing the extensive scope of his criminal activity. Long before he became widely known as the East Area Rapist, D'Angelo is believed to have begun his criminal career in Visalia, earning the early label of the Visalia Ransacker. During the period of 1974 to 1975, investigators suspected that this area served as the training ground for the criminal who would later escalate to far more violent offenses. Crimes dating back as early as May 1973, including the violent acts of the so-called Cordova cat burglar, during which several family dogs were bludgeoned to death, and the Exeter ransacker incidents are now believed to be part of his early criminal record. During this time, over a period of approximately 20 months, DeAngelo is suspected to have committed one murder and carried out around 120 burglaries, a period marked by increasingly aggressive and brazen behavior. In late April 2018, the Visalia chief of police stated that, although there was no direct DNA evidence linking DeAngelo to the Central Valley cases, the department possessed other compelling evidence that contributed to the investigation. The chief expressed confidence that the Visalia ransacker had finally been captured. While the statutes of limitations for the burglaries had expired, DeAngelo was formally charged on August 13, 2018, with the first-degree murder of Claude Snelling, a killing that occurred in 1975. In 2020, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to the murder of Snelling, closing a chapter on one of the earliest known crimes in his decades-long criminal trajectory. The first recorded incident attributed to the Visalia ransacker occurred on March 19, 1974, when a modest sum of $50 in coins was stolen from a piggy bank. Over the following months, the ransacker's activities revealed a distinctive and unusual pattern. Most of the break-ins involved entering homes and rifling through the occupants' possessions, often scattering women's underclothing and stealing a variety of low-value items while deliberately ignoring banknotes or other valuable objects that were in plain sight. In some cases, he would arrange or display the stolen or displaced items within the house, leaving behind evidence of his presence in a way that appeared both methodical and ritualistic. The items targeted during these burglaries varied widely. Piggy banks and coin jars were commonly emptied, and stolen property often included collectible blue-chip stamps, foreign or historically significant coins, and small personal items such as single earrings, cufflinks, rings, and medallions. On occasion, the thefts included weapons and ammunition, suggesting a willingness to take greater risks. One particularly notable day occurred on November 30th, 1974, when investigators documented 12 separate burglary incidents attributed to the ransacker. Despite the seemingly random nature of the thefts, many of the burglaries shared common characteristics. The perpetrator frequently climbed fences and used established routes through parks, walkways, ditches, and trails to move from house to house undetected. He often attempted to pry open multiple points of entry, with a particular focus on windows, while leaving multiple exits open, including windows, garage doors, and garden doors, facilitating a rapid escape if necessary. The ransacker also sometimes moved removed window screens onto beds or into bedrooms and placed warning items, such as dishes or bottles, against doors or on door handles, possibly as a form of psychological intimidation. Gloves were consistently worn, leaving no fingerprint evidence behind, further indicating careful planning and awareness of forensic investigation. These distinctive behaviors established a clear pattern that law enforcement would later use to link the Visalia ransacker to a series of escalating crimes, marking the early stages of what would ultimately become a decades-long criminal trajectory that on September 11, 1975, Joseph DeAngelo broke into the home of Claude Snelling, a 45-year-old journalism professor at the College of the Sequoias. Earlier that year, on February 5th, Snelling had already encountered danger when he chased a prowler discovered beneath his 16-year-old daughter's bedroom window around 10 p.m. That night in September, he was awakened at approximately 2 a.m. by strange noises coming from outside. Upon leaving his bedroom, Snelling ran through the open back door and confronted a ski-masked intruder in his carport, who was attempting to kidnap his daughter. The intruder had already subdued the girl, threatening her with the possibility of being stabbed or shot. In the ensuing confrontation, Snelling was shot twice. Staggering back into the house toward his wife, he ultimately succumbed to his injuries. After the shooting, the assailant violently attacked the daughter, punching and kicking her before fleeing the scene. A stolen bicycle, later linked to the assailant, was discovered nearby at 615 Redwood Street. To help investigators, Snelling's daughter, Beth, age 16, underwent hypnosis to recover further details about the attack. The Visalia Police Department responded by dedicating additional resources to apprehending the ransacker, including posting a reward of $4,000. Nighttime stakeouts were established near homes that had previously been targeted, yet the series of ransackings continued unabated. Later that same year, on December 12, 1975, around 8:30 p.m., a masked man entered the backyard of a house at 1505 West Cahuilla Avenue, an area frequently visited by the ransacker. Detective William McGowan, who was on a stakeout inside the garage, attempted to detain the suspect. The man shrieked, removed his mask, and feigned surrender after McGowan fired a warning shot. However, the suspect quickly jumped the fence to a neighboring house at 1501 West Cahuilla Avenue, drew a revolver with his left hand, and fired once near McGowan's face, shattering his flashlight. Nearby officers rushed to assist McGowan, but the shooter managed to escape. Evidence recovered at the scene included the broken flashlight, tennis shoe tracks, and items dropped by the assailant, such as blue chip stamps and a sock filled with coins. D'Angelo moved to the Sacramento area in 1976, a shift that marked a dangerous escalation in his criminal behavior from burglary to rape. His early crimes in the region were largely concentrated in the then unincorporated communities of Carmichael, Citrus Heights, and Rancho Cordova, located east of Sacramento. That on December 18, 1976, D'Angelo entered the home of his 10th known victim, 15-year-old Chris Pedretti, who was alone while her parents attended a Christmas party. At around 6 p.m., as she sat playing the piano, D'Angelo approached her wearing a ski mask, pressed a knife to her throat, and threatened her by saying, "Do what I say or I'll kill you and be gone in the dark." A statement that would later be used as the title of Michelle McNamara's book about the case. For more than 2 hours, he assaulted her multiple times. Pedretti later explained that he repeatedly moved her between rooms and at times forced her outside, naked in the winter cold, before bringing her back inside to continue the assaults. When he finally left, he placed her on a couch in front of a fireplace, leaving her blindfolded, bound, and gagged. After managing to free herself, she ran to nearby neighbors and asked for help. Pedretti later spoke about the deep humiliation she felt during the police investigation, particularly when she was asked intimate questions she was not emotionally or mentally prepared to answer at such a young age, and again during the medical examination. She described these experiences as additional victimizations layered onto the trauma she had already endured that night. D'Angelo's early modus operandi involved stalking middle-class neighborhoods at night, targeting women who were alone in single-story homes, often located near schools, creeks, trails, or other open areas that allowed for a quick escape. He was spotted on several occasions, but consistently managed to evade capture, and in one incident he shot and seriously wounded a young man who attempted to pursue him. Most victims reported seeing or hearing a prowler on their property before the attacks, and many had previously experienced break-ins. Investigators believe the offender carried out extensive reconnaissance in targeted neighborhoods, peering into windows and moving through yards before choosing a specific home. It was also thought that he sometimes entered the homes of future victims in advance to unlock windows, unload firearms, and place ligatures for later use. In addition, he frequently made phone calls to future victims, sometimes over a period of months, to monitor their routines and movements. Although D'Angelo initially targeted women who were alone in their homes or with children, he later shifted his focus to attacking couples. This change in his modus operandi is believed to have been influenced by media reports suggesting that he only targeted women who were alone. His typical method involved breaking into a home through a window or sliding glass door and waking the sleeping occupants with a flashlight while threatening them with a handgun. The victims were then restrained with ligatures, often shoelaces he either found inside the home or brought with him, and were blindfolded and gagged using towels torn into strips. In most cases, the female victim was forced to restrain her male partner before she herself was bound. The restraints were often applied so tightly that victims reported numbness in their hands for hours after being released. He typically separated the couple, frequently placing dishes on the man's back and warning that he would kill everyone in the house if he heard them move or rattle. He then took the woman into another room, usually the living room, where he assaulted her repeatedly. Years later, police revealed that during one attack in 1978, D'Angelo repeatedly uttered the words, "I hate you, Bonnie," referring to his former fiancée. He sometimes remained inside the home for hours, rummaging through closets and drawers, eating food from the kitchen, drinking beer, returning to assault the woman again, or issuing further threats. In some cases, victims believed he had finally left, only for him to suddenly reappear from the darkness that on the night of February 2nd, 1978, a young Sacramento couple, Brian Keith Majori, age 21, a military policeman stationed at Mather Air Force Base, and his 20-year-old wife, Katie Lee Majori, were walking their dog in the Rancho Cordova area, close to the locations of several East Area rapist attacks. After an apparent confrontation on the street, the couple attempted to flee but were pursued and shot to death. Investigators later suspected that the killings were connected to the East Area rapist due to the proximity to previous attack sites and the discovery of a shoelace near the scene. On June 15, 2016, the FBI publicly stated that it was confident the East Area rapist was responsible for the murders. Years later, on June 29, 2020, D'Angelo formally pleaded guilty to killing the Majoris. Shortly after the rape committed on July 5, 1979, D'Angelo relocated to Southern California, where his crimes escalated further into murder. His first known killings in this phase occurred in Santa Barbara County in October 1979. These attacks continued through 1981, with a single additional attack taking place in 1986. In the initial assault, the targeted couple survived after alerting neighbors, forcing the intruder to flee, but all subsequent victims were killed, either by gunshot or blunt force trauma. Because D'Angelo was not connected to these crimes for many years, investigators in Santa Barbara County referred to the unknown killer as the Night Stalker. Separate murders in Ventura, Irvine, and Dana Point were later linked through DNA evidence prior to 2000. To avoid confusion with serial killer Richard Ramirez, who had become known by the same nickname, the offender was eventually renamed the original Night Stalker. 1979 on October 1st. An intruder broke into the home of the couple in Goleta and tied them up. When the man overheard the intruder muttering, "I'll kill him," both he and his wife attempted to escape while the assailant briefly left the room, and the woman screamed. Realizing they had raised an alarm, the intruder fled on a bicycle. A neighbor, who happened to be an FBI agent, responded to the commotion and pursued the suspect. The intruder abandoned the bicycle and a knife and escaped on foot through the backyards out on December 30th. 44-year-old orthopedic surgeon Dr. Robert Offerman and 35-year-old clinical psychologist Dr. Deborah Alexandria Manning were discovered shot to death in the bedroom of Offerman's condominium on Avenida Pequeña in Goleta. Manning had also been sexually assaulted, and 2 of her rings were found hidden between the mattress and bed frame near her body. Offerman's bindings had been removed, suggesting he had struggled with the attacker. Neighbors reported hearing gunshots. Paw prints from a large dog were discovered at the scene, prompting speculation that the killer may have brought a dog with him. The perpetrator also ate leftover Christmas turkey from Offerman's refrigerator, leaving the remnants in the kitchen. Evidence indicated that he had broken into a vacant adjoining condo and stolen a bicycle, which was later found abandoned on a street north of the scene, taken from a third residence within the complex. 1980 on March 13th. 33-year-old interior designer Charlene Smith and 43-year-old attorney Lyman Smith were found murdered in their Ventura home. Charlene had also been sexually assaulted. The victims had been bludgeoned to death with a log taken from a woodpile on the side of the house. They were discovered 3 days later by Lyman's 12-year-old son, who had come by to mow the lawn. The bedroom alarm clock was still ringing. Both victims' wrists and ankles had been bound with drapery cord, and Charlene's wrists featured an unusual Chinese knot, a diamond knot, which had also appeared in at least one confirmed East Area rapist attack. Because of this distinctive knot, the killer was briefly dubbed the Diamond Knot Killer. On August 19th. 24-year-old Keith Eli Harrington and 27-year-old Patrice and Harrington were found bludgeoned to death in their home on Cockleshell Drive in Dana Point's Niguel Shores gated community. Patrice had been raped and was bludgeoned so severely that her face and skull were pulverized. Although evidence suggested the couple's wrists and ankles had been bound, no murder weapon or ligatures were recovered at the scene. The Harringtons had been married for only 3 months. Patrice worked as a pediatric nurse in Irvine, while Keith was a fourth-year medical student at UC Irvine, on track to graduate early in December 1980. Keith's brother, Bruce, later spent nearly $2 million supporting California Proposition 69, which authorized DNA collection from all California felons and certain other offenders. 1981, on February 6th, 28-year-old Manuela Withun was raped and murdered in her Irvine home. Although her body showed signs of being tied before she was bludgeoned, investigators found no murder weapon or ligatures at the scene. At the time of the attack, her husband, David Withun, was in the hospital due to illness, leaving her alone. The murder had lasting effects on David, as the killer continued to stalk him and made several phone calls to the house after Manuela's death. Suspicion from police and neighbors also fell on David, particularly after he married a supportive coworker, Rhonda, not long afterward. Over time, David turned to alcohol, and his second marriage ended in divorce after nearly a decade. He was eventually exonerated through DNA testing and passed away in 2008 on July 27th. 35-year-old Sherry Domingo and 27-year-old Gregory Sanchez became the 10th and 11th victims of the original Night Stalker. Both were attacked in Domingo's residence on Toltec Way in Goleta, several blocks south of Robert Offerman's condominium. Domingo had been living there temporarily. The house belonged to a relative and was up for sale. The perpetrator gained entry through a small bathroom window. Some investigators believe Sanchez may have realized he was confronting the killer responsible for the Offerman, Manning murders, and attempted to tackle him rather than be restrained. No neighbors responded to the gunshot. Sanchez's head was covered with clothing taken from the closet. Domingo was raped and bludgeoned. Bruises on her wrists and ankles indicated she had been tied, although no restraints were recovered. That a piece of shipping twine was found near her bed, and fibers from an unknown source were scattered over her body. Authorities speculated that the attacker may have worked as a painter or in a similar trade at the nearby Calle Real shopping center. 1986, on May 4th, 18-year-old Janelle Lisa Cruz was found raped and bludgeoned to death in her Irvine home. At the time of the attack, her family was on vacation in Mexico. The house, which was for sale, was discovered by a realtor who had stopped by to show it to a prospective buyer. Cruz's body was found on her bed, beaten beyond recognition, with her teeth dislodged and embedded in both her hair and lungs. Investigators believe the murder weapon was a pipe wrench, which Cruz's stepfather had reported missing. Other suspected murders after his arrest. DeAngelo was also investigated in connection with several earlier cases, including the 1974 Visalia rape and murder of Jennifer Armour, the 1975 Exeter rape and murder of Donna Jo Richmond, and a 1978 murder of a woman and her son in Simi Valley. However, DNA testing ultimately cleared him as a suspect in all 4 cases. Additionally, Victoria Police in Australia ruled out any connection between DeAngelo, who had docked there during his Navy service, and the Melbourne serial child rapist and murderer known as Mr. Cruel. In December 1977, an individual claiming to be the East Area Rapist sent a poem titled Excitement's Crave to the Sacramento Bee, the Sacramento Mayor's office and television station KVI. On December 11th, a masked man evaded law enforcement after phoning authorities to announce that he would strike that night on Wood Avenue. In the poem, he reflected on human behavior and societal expectations, describing how individuals take stock of their worth as they mature and make choices to seek satisfaction, while also commenting on the pursuit of fame and leisure. He referenced notorious criminals, including Jesse James and the Son of Sam, suggesting that temptation called to him as well, and even proposed that Sacramento should consider turning his life into a movie to fund his planned exile. The poem ended with a chilling sign-off as your East Area Rapist and deserving pest, highlighting both his desire for recognition and his disturbing sense of entitlement. During the investigation of the 42nd attack in Danville, detectives recovered 3 sheets of notebook paper near a location where a suspicious vehicle had reportedly been parked. Investigators believed the pages were accidentally dropped, possibly falling from a bag. The first sheet appeared to be a school homework essay about General George Armstrong Custer. The second page contained a journal-style reflection in which the writer described a deeply negative experience with a sixth-grade teacher. In the entry, the author expressed intense anger and resentment, recalling sixth grade as the worst and most painful year of elementary school. He wrote about repeated disappointments caused by the teacher, including canceled field trips, which he said led to growing hatred and emotional distress. The writer described being frequently punished for talking in class and being forced to write lines as discipline, an experience he found humiliating and unfair. He claimed to have spent countless hours writing sentences day and night, sometimes hundreds at a time, until his hands ached and he felt overwhelming physical and emotional pain. The punishment, he wrote, left him ashamed, angry, and emotionally scarred, describing episodes of crying from humiliation, disgust, and rage. The entry concluded with the writer stating that the anger and shame from his sixth grade year would remain with him for life. That on the third sheet, investigators found a hand-drawn map depicting what appeared to be a suburban neighborhood, with the word punishment written across the reverse side. While authorities were unable to identify the actual location represented in the map, the detailed drawing suggested that the artist possessed knowledge of architectural layouts and landscape design. Detective Larry Poole later explained that the map likely represented a fantasy location, reflecting the rapist's imagined territory and desired area for committing attacks. Phone calls on the East Side Rapist, March 18, 1977. On March 18, 1977, the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office received 3 calls from a man claiming to be the East Area Rapist, though none were recorded. The first 2 calls, received at 4:15 and 4:30 p.m., were identical and ended with the caller laughing before hanging up. During the third call, at 5 p.m., the man said, "I'm the East Side Rapist, and I have my next victim already stalked, and you guys can't catch me." "You're never gonna catch me." December 2nd, 1977. A man identifying himself as the rapist called the Sacramento Police Department, taunting officers. "You're never gonna catch me. East Area Rapist, you dumb fuckers. I'm gonna fuck again tonight. Be careful." This call was recorded and later made public. "It's me again, December 9th, 1977. At approximately 5:40 p.m. on December 9th, 1977, the 21st known rape victim received a call at her residence. After a brief silence, she answered, "Hello," and a male voice in a hoarse whisper said, "Merry Christmas." "It's me again," before rapidly hanging up. The victim later told investigators that she immediately recognized the caller as the rapist and that she would never forget his voice. What Avenue, December 10th, 1977. Shortly before 10 p.m. on December 10th, 1977, Sacramento authorities received 2 identical calls in which the caller warned, "I am going to hit tonight." What Avenue? Both calls were recorded, and investigators determined that the caller was the same individual who had made the December 2nd call. In response, law enforcement increased patrols in the area that night. Around 2:30 a.m., a masked man was spotted bicycling on the What Avenue Bridge, but managed to evade officers. When seen again at 4:30 a.m., he abandoned the bicycle and escaped on foot. "Gonna kill you," January 2nd, 1978. On January 2nd, 1978, the first known rape victim received a wrong number call asking for Ray. The call was recorded, and later that evening, police believe the same caller made a threatening call to her, which was also recorded. During this call, the perpetrator was identified by the victim as her assailant and repeatedly said, "Gonna kill you, gonna kill you, gonna kill you, bitch, 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 fucking whore." Counseling service, January 6th, 1978. A few days later, a man claiming to be the East Area Rapist contacted the Contact Counseling Service, stating, "I have a problem. I need help because I don't want to do this anymore." After a brief conversation, the caller added, "I believe you are tracing this call," and abruptly hung up. Later calls, 1982 to 1991. In October 1982, a prior victim received a call at her workplace, a Denny's restaurant, during which the rapist threatened to assault her again. Contra Costa County investigator Paul Holes noted that the caller likely happened to be at the restaurant and recognized his victim. In 1991, another previous victim received a 1-minute phone call from the perpetrator, during which she could hear a woman and children in the background, suggesting he had a family. Final call, 2001. On April 6, 2001, one day after an article in the Sacramento Bee linked the original Night Stalker to the East Area Rapist, a victim received a phone call from him in which he cryptically asked, "Remember when we played?" Before the original Night Stalker was officially linked to the East Area Rapist in 2001, some law enforcement officials, particularly from the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, had attempted to connect the Goleta cases as well. These suspected links were based largely on similarities in modus operandi. One of the previously connected original Night Stalker double murders had taken place in Ventura, about 40 miles southeast of Goleta, while the remaining murders occurred in Orange County, an additional 90 miles farther southeast. In 2001, DNA evidence connected several rapes in Contra Costa County, previously attributed to the East Area Rapist, to the murders of the Smiths, the Harringtons, Manuela Withun, and Janelle Cruz. A decade later, DNA analysis confirmed that the murders of Sherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez were also committed by the East Area Rapist, who was by then publicly identified as the Golden State Killer. That on June 15, 2016, the FBI released additional information regarding the crimes, including new composite sketches and details about the attacks, and announced a $50,000 reward for information. The effort included the creation of a national database to assist law enforcement in investigating the cases and managing tips from the public. Using genetic genealogy through the website GEDmatch, investigators were able to identify distant relatives of D'Angelo, tracing his family line back to his great-great-great-great-grandfather in the 1800s. From this research, investigators built approximately 25 family trees. One tree alone, which ultimately led to D'Angelo, contained around 1,000 individuals. Over several months, investigators used additional clues such as age, sex, and location to systematically eliminate candidates until D'Angelo remained the sole viable suspect. The formal identification process began in December 2017, led by Detective Paul Holes and FBI lawyer Steve Kramer, when the killer's DNA profile from a Ventura County rape kit was uploaded to GEDmatch. The website matched 10 to 20 individuals sharing the same great-great-great-grandparents as the Golden State Killer. Working with genealogist Barbara Ray Venner, a team of 5 investigators used these matches to construct an extensive family tree. From this tree, they narrowed the investigation to 2 suspects. One was ruled out through a relative's DNA test, leaving Joseph James D'Angelo as the primary suspect. On April 18, 2018, investigators secretly collected a DNA sample from the door handle of D'Angelo's car, and a second sample was later obtained from a tissue found in his curbside garbage. Both were matched to DNA linked to Golden State Killer crimes. Since his arrest, some commentators have raised ethical concerns about the secondary use of personally identifiable information. During the investigation, several individuals were considered as potential suspects but later eliminated. Brett Glasby from Goleta was investigated by Santa Barbara County authorities but had been murdered in Mexico in 1982 before the killing of Janelle Cruz. Paul Cornfed Schneider, a high-ranking member of the Aryan Brotherhood who lived in Orange County during the murders of the Harringtons, Manuela Withun, and Janelle Cruz, was cleared through DNA testing in the 1990s. Joe Alsip, a friend and business partner of victim Lyman Smith, was initially implicated after his pastor reported a supposed confession and was arraigned for the Smith murders in 1982, but charges were later dropped, and DNA testing in 1997 confirmed his innocence. Gregory Gonzalez from Garden Grove attended the same drug rehabilitation class as Janelle Cruz and was arrested after an informant claimed he confessed to her murder. However, charges were dropped a year later when blood testing proved he was not involved on the evening of April 24, 2018. Sacramento County Sheriff's deputies arrested Joseph James D'Angelo in the side yard of his home in Sacramento. He was initially charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, and on May 10, the Santa Barbara County District Attorney's Office added 4 more counts of first-degree murder. According to Sacramento County Prosecutor T.N. Ho, during a police interrogation following his arrest, D'Angelo spoke to himself, saying, "I didn't have the strength to push him out. He made me. He went with me. It was like in my head, he's a part of me. I didn't want to do those things. I pushed Jerry out and had a happy life. I did all those things. I destroyed all their lives. So now I've got to pay the price." Prosecutors believe these statements were likely an attempt to manipulate law enforcement or to lay the groundwork for an insanity defense. D'Angelo had reportedly used similar tactics during a 1979 shoplifting arrest. Detectives noted that he initially requested an attorney, but they later cited a legal theory that any potential Miranda violation could be justified, with the understanding that prosecutors would be barred from using the interview against him in court. D'Angelo could not be charged with the rapes or burglaries he committed, as the statute of limitations for those offenses had expired. But he faced 13 counts of murder and 13 counts of kidnapping. He was arraigned in Sacramento on August 23, 2018. In November 2018, prosecutors from the 6 counties involved estimated that the case could cost taxpayers $20 million and potentially take a decade to resolve. At a court hearing on April 10, 2019, prosecutors announced their intention to seek the death penalty, and the judge ruled that cameras could be permitted in the courtroom during the trial. That on March 4, 2020, D'Angelo offered to plead guilty if the death penalty were excluded, though this proposal was not accepted at the time. Ultimately, on June 29, 2020, as part of a plea bargain to avoid capital punishment, D'Angelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, including murder committed during burglaries and rapes, as well as 13 counts of kidnapping. On August 21, 2020, he was sentenced to multiple consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. After hearing days of pre-sentencing victim impact statements, D'Angelo offered a brief apology, saying, "I've listened to all your statements, each one of them, and I'm truly sorry to everyone I've hurt." In November 2020, he was transferred to North Kern State Prison, and as of February 2025, he remains in protective custody at California State Prison, Corcoran. Prosecutors have suggested that D'Angelo's motive for his crimes stemmed from a desire for power and control over his victims, which they believe was driven by feelings of personal inadequacy and powerlessness in his own life.